Welcome back to Bread and Butter, where we're just serving up the basics for Hearthstone improvement. Welcome to episode 72. Today, Doc is not here, but I'm joined by two fantastic guests. WorldEight. WorldEight has been on the show a few times before. How are you doing tonight?
Doing great. Boys' night here. Wife is out of town. So, happy to be here with you two gentlemen. Just energy is very good. So I'm happy to do the show.
I love it. And we also have another returning guest, one of our favorites, RonMexico. Ron, how are you doing tonight?
Hey, I'm doing great. Happy to be on the show. Absolute pleasure to be here with you, Tito, and WorldEight, who we've interacted a number of times before, but never on a podcast together. So this is exciting for me.
Yeah. So, Ron, what have you been doing inside of Hearthstone lately?
Well, believe it or not, I have been playing some Hunter. And also a few other things. Lately, I decided that I would just start rouletting through a bunch of decks, just things that I liked a little bit more to, mix up the variety a little bit while I was streaming. And usually in the past, what I did was I would just play like one deck, and then as soon as that game was over, I would switch to the next. But I decided recently, I'll just see how many wins it can get. And then I started going on a bunch of win streaks. With like the respective decks before I switched, and I just would switch when they lost. And there's been like kind of a decent amount of fun things to play. The meta isn't super exciting at the moment, but there's, I don't know, it's not like horribly unbalanced or anything. There's a decent amount of variety in playable classes and archetypes, even though there's a lot that's not super exciting. So we are all kind of waiting for the mini set shakeup, which will happen any day now. But overall, I haven't minded too much the Hearthstone meta at the moment. I've been just jamming a bunch of games with a bunch of decks.
And by the time you, dear listener, hear this episode, the mini set will have already been out by at least maybe a day or two. WorldEight, what have you been up to in the world of Hearthstone?
It's been a pretty good season for me. I had what I would call late legend. I have 11x. I came in legend on the 5th or something like that. I picked up hand buff paladin, and I kind of was looking through numbers and various sites, and I was like, hey, I think I found something. And so I put keeper strength in the deck, and it turned out to be really, really good. Cruised to legend, came in mid 200s, and then got up to about rank 15 with the deck pretty quickly. And I was just flying with that, and I was feeling great. And then, I lost, and then I lost again, and then I tilted right back to where I came in at. So, one of those roller coaster things, where I knew I should have stopped playing, but then I didn't, because I kept chasing the losses. But I'm doing well again, and it's a fun deck, and I passed the deck code along to Sunk, who got rank 1 with it, and that made me feel absolutely terrific. One of the things that I really like in Hearthstone is the deck building part of things. I'm not really the most technical player. I do okay, but I kind of live in the deck builder. And for someone to take a list of mine and do well with it, it means a lot to me. Or when people give me feedback saying I really liked your list, which kind of happens after that kind of exposure. That I'm just soaring high after that kind of stuff. Aside from that, I did not sign up for THL this season. Yet I played 3 THL matches this week. I am subbing all over the place. I don't know what it is, but people are ghosting their teams in THL, and I'm stepping in because I feel bad for these team captains, and I'm like, all right, yeah, sure, I'll pick it up. It's a little tough for me to do all that scheduling, but I'm happy to do it. I'm getting exposure to some other formats there. Like, I've never did the Wilds competitive side of things, and that's crazy, man. Like, I love Wild, but it's again, a whole nother thing with the tournament scene. So yeah, Hearthstone's been fun for me. Really looking forward to the mini set. There's one card in particular that I'm super excited for. no one would guess it. Maybe Ron. Maybe you too, Tito. But super excited for one card in particular, and yeah, so it's been good. How about you, Tito? What you been doing?
Oh, I've been playing THL like you, only once a week, and I believe my team's gonna have an opening or two next year. So maybe we can settle you onto one team once a week, and that'll be a lot easier. Ron, I was a little disappointed. Not that you had anything to do with it, but I had a trios team ready to go, and trios just didn't happen this season. So I was pretty sad about that.
Yeah, it's too bad.
This season I mostly played Reno Egg Hunter. I played a little bit of Sludge Warlock, but for the most part, I stuck with the Reno Egg Warrior. So Egg Warrior, sorry, Egg Hunter. I think I said Paladin. I love the Reno Egg Hunter. It's a fun deck. But once I hit Legend, I started to think, hey, what if I can make this a non-Reno deck so I can get more fun out of the eggs, get more consistency. And I built my own. I didn't do any net decking. I just kind of took my shell of what I liked and I built upon it, and it went really well for a while. I won like, I want to say 14 out of 15 games or something like that. I am even able to tweet about it saying, hey, this is a lot of fun. This is good. Fallen to earth a bit since then, but it's a fun deck. You can do a lot of stupid good things with it. And I'm really enjoying it, and I'm looking forward to maybe even expanding it with some of the cards from the mini set. We'll see, but it's winning enough where I think I'm gonna try to stick with it quite a bit for the season and see what we can do with it, and if we can get more consistent with it, and maybe tweak it a little bit and find a real meta breaker. But who knows? But Ron, let me ask you this: what have you been doing outside of Hearthstone?
Outside of Hearthstone has just been not very exciting, to be honest. I've been working too much, sleep deprivation. My partner works as a nurse, and she's been like extra busy, and I've been trying to help her with that. And then in the sprinkling of free time that we've had, we started watching a bunch of anime together. So I mean, that's been fun in our free time, but not a whole lot of other things exciting that have gotten to happen because it's just been extra busy. But that's okay. Sometimes it's just how things go.
I would be bemused, I don't know if that's the right word, if I did not ask you, for our listeners, what animes have you been watching?
The number one thing that we really enjoy is called The Time I Got Reincarnated as a Slime. And we thought the title was super weird, and we weren't really interested in watching it for a bit longer than we actually got into it. So we're like, what is that? But then we started watching it, and we're like, okay, this is great. It's a fun show. There's a lot of like interesting there's like a intrigue and stuff that happens in it. It's like this one character just kind of forms like a whole nation. It's fun. It's a cool thing. I don't want to give like a lot away. Just if it's something, if people are really into anime, that would be one that I would recommend.
And if you want to know more, you can always show up to Ron's stream and ask him about it. I'm sure he'd love to talk about it, but only if you seek it out. I used to watch some anime, but like the early anime, like from the 80s, which was like Star Blazers and Force 5 with like Guy King and stuff that no one's ever heard of because it was only in America and like New England and Virginia. And it didn't make it to the rest of the nation. So I have these very core childhood memories of these things, and no one else, I can't really talk about it because no one else really knows about them. But WorldEight, what have you been doing outside of the world of Hearthstone?
Well, this wasn't last week. This has been the last 2 weeks. We got a new puppy. We rescued a little black lab. She's about 5 months old. You know, when you rescue a dog, you never know for, completely when their birthday is, but took her to the vet. The vet said she's about 5 months old. So she's terrific. We had a dog for 13 years, my wife and I, and had to put him down last year, which was really sad. And then we waited a little bit till we kind of found the right one, and I think we found her, and she's great, but not housebroken completely. And, so still getting up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom. And that's just, having a dog already and going through that process, we know it's inevitable. She'll be housebroken, and she won't dig in the garden, or we can work on that. These are all things we can work on. But yeah, a lot of sleepless nights from that, and on top of that, our younger son had strep throat, but it's all worth it, because it's just everything with the little ones. It's all temporary, good or bad, and it's awesome to see them grow and develop. And even with the little dog, it's just it's a light of our lives right now, to have this great addition to the family. So that's been keeping us very busy, though. I'm actually pretty lucky. I got a bit of Hearthstone in. So it's yeah, we're good, and I love dogs. So anybody who enjoys dogs, I encourage you to rescue one if you ever get a chance. All kinds of dogs need homes too, even if they're not purebreds.
Fair enough. Yeah, we've done some.
Nice.
One of our dogs is a rescue. We've done some fostering of dogs that have been like brought up to New Hampshire from Texas, and cats and whatnot. Ron, do you have something you want to say, or? Oh, you had that kind of. You look like you were gonna say something.
I was just thinking about dog. I haven't had a dog myself in a little while. It's reminiscing. It's something I plan on doing again sometime, hopefully soon, but not just yet.
And for those of you that know where RonMexico comes from, the name, that's not why he hasn't had a dog in a while. So
settle down. So that name came before the whole other incident. All right. And just to be on the record again for the millionth time, the name is intended to make fun of the person, not support the person. Just FYI. Okay, we can move on.
Fair enough. And it's not the worst name that you've been called. We've called you, I believe, Ron Jeremy time to time. That's my fault.
Yes, I remember you saying that before. Yeah.
You saw the clip, right?
That is, yes, I did. That is, I think, the first and only time so far that I've been called Ron Jeremy.
So for me, I have found myself on the job market. I was just told this week that my employment will be coming to an end. Currently, I am a contractor at will, but I shouldn't say that. I'm going to edit that out and beep that out for a couple years. But this is, even though I got laid off once about 5 years ago, but I had found another job within my same company within like 2 days, so I didn't actually get laid off. And I got in the job market for once, just looking for myself. But honestly, I have not been looking for an actual job in like 20 years where I didn't have something. So this is kind of worrisome, but also exciting. And I have some time to figure out what I'm going to do. So hopefully we're going to be here okay. If not, maybe we'll be opening a Patreon. I'm just kidding. And we're going to have one sometime, but it's not going to be related to that. But that's been I'm oddly not stressed like I normally would be when something like this happens. Like, I have concerns. You want to keep the lights on. You want to keep the roof over the head. You got to keep food on the table. But I'm not panicked. And I think that's probably just the fact that I'm old. And I've been doing this a while. Anyway, and I barely have enough hair as it is. I'm not going to lose any hair over this situation. So otherwise, I'm not going to have any left. But that's not what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about Hearthstone, and we're going to talk a little bit about the mini set. Now, by the time you hear this, like I said, the mini set's already going to be out. You're already going to play with the cards. You're already going to know some of the answers to these things we're saying. But we're going to give some initial impressions. We're not going to go through every card. You want that? Go to CoinConceived, go to Blizzlick, go to any of those podcasts that are going to go through everything. You've already listened to those. You don't need to hear us talk about those. But what you do want to know is, how is the mini set going to affect things? So I'm going to talk. So we have two different keywords two different effects that are happening. One is called, I think, Gigantify, which is kind of like the opposite of Miniaturize. And that is making a 8/8 size copy of the card you play. So that is interesting. There's also packs for several cards. So if you remember Elise, one of the Elises where you used to, if you didn't have any duplicates or something, you got a pack, Ungoro pack that it would shuffle into your deck, and you would draw it, and then you would play it, and then you would open up a pack of 5 cards from Ungoro. It was just like a normal pack that you would buy, and you would put in your hand. These work a little differently. You get 5 cards, not necessarily from the same set. Some of them are like Taunt, some of them are Beasts, and they're only there for the rest of your turn, and then they disappear. So I think that's interesting. So let's talk about packs first. What are your thoughts on packs in general? Do you think they're going to be impactful? WorldEight, why don't we start with you first?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks. I think that they generally won't be, actually. I think maybe the Rogue one. And if they had a Mage one, that too. You don't usually. We've had these kind of effects before. And when you open these packs, it's a lot of fun. It's a really fun mechanic. But something like the 5 random beasts doesn't really impress me. I've played with Ball of Spiders, and if it's been okay. It's not amazing. Maybe you'll get one good thing out of it. Something like the Rogue pack, though, you're much more likely to be playing this in a deck with like Gaslight Gatekeeper. You pair those two together, and all of a sudden you've added 5 cards to your Gatekeeper turn, and then everything must go. So there are possibilities with that, and something like Spectral Cutlass. But the Warrior one, the Taunt guys, Taunt cards generically aren't great. Beasts aren't generically great. I think the one that has the most potential is the Rogue one, but very fun idea. I like to see things like this where it's you would only really see this in Hearthstone. Like, you couldn't pick up Magic the Gathering and they'd be like, well, here's a random pack of cards for you to play with, and then I'm going to take them away. This is a big advantage of a digital card game. But I'm not too bullish on them in terms of power level.
That actually be pretty fun if like you had a card like that in Magic and you had to keep booster packs on the side. So that way, if you play the card, you had to open up a booster pack, and if you didn't, then you didn't get the value out of the card. Are we sure the Gatekeeper thing is going to work? Because they are temporary copies. So does it work if you play like a Projectionist? If you shuffle a Projectionist card in there, does it actually go back in your deck and not be temporary anymore?
Yeah, and there's actually you'll see this in Wild. There's a mage spell that'll fill your hand with random mage spells, and then people will play Finley for pretty much the same purpose. Free 10 card hand. So I believe there was some rules clarification from Ridiculous Hat saying, you did temporary copy if you did it specifically with Gatekeeper. Any cards that end up back in your hand after a Gatekeeper, those are temporary. They will disappear. But anything that ends up in your deck from the pack, that will stay in your deck. So it gets a buff or a debuff, enchantment, whatever you want to call it. But once it goes into your deck, it does not keep that. But if it ended up in your hand again before the end of the turn, yes, you would lose it. Hopefully that clarifies things and doesn't make it more confusing.
That's fine. Ron, what do you think about the packs?
Pure garbage. They are terrible. I'm honestly kind of annoyed that they were printed at all. The only thing that would have been redeeming to me for the existence of those packs being printed would be if every single class got a pack, so that every class equally got only 2 actual cards in the mini set as opposed to 3. And I'm extra annoyed that only 3 classes got a pack in Warrior, Rogue, and Hunter. So too bad for Warrior, Rogue, and Hunter, because that means they got 2 mini set cards, not 3 mini set cards, because those cards are pure trash. Now, I will say, as far as Wild is concerned, at the very least, they might be good because of the interaction with Finley. You can maybe just consider putting that pack in any deck that also has Finley and just keep it in the mulligan, and then play that on like turn 2, and So you play the pack and then you play Finley, and now you draw a whole bunch of cards, and it also flips things to the bottom of your deck, which means all those terrible unplayable cards that you get from the pack will just be sitting at the bottom and helping you not fatigue maybe if the game goes super long. And Rogue in Wild especially can exploit Twisted Pack because it should make the Wild Pawn Null completely free immediately, I think. Or something like that. I think it's like a 5-mana card, so it would go to 0 like right away by playing Twisted Pack, which seems maybe irresponsible and broken. So we come down to either it's like horrible and awful and why would you ever do it, or in different game mode it breaks the format in some way. So I'm really unhappy that the packs got printed at all. I would much prefer they've not done that. I think it sucks as an idea. I will say that it's, cheeky and fun that you can do that with like a digital format. And obviously there's a lot of decision making by the designers that are not really considering the competitive aspect, which I'm heavily consumed with. So it's not really targeted to me. It's targeted towards other people who play Hearthstone very much more for fun rather than, well, I want to win this game, so why would I run this card that sucks? It's, hey, this card could be really fun and have some funny, silly fireworks on a turn, and that would be great and enjoyable for my card game. So, like, I get it. It's fine. Personally, don't like it. Not for me.
And that's fair. So I think the only comment I have is the only person that's probably going to dislike this more than you is future Habu Gabu. When somebody plays this card at a Masters Tour, generates a random King plush in a class that's not even supposed to have it, and knocks him out with that. So apologies for Habu Gabu for that in the future.
I mean, I think that only happens if they also randomly generate the pack to begin with.
Oh, yes.
Because if they made it to the Masters Tour and put the pack in their deck on purpose, something's gone horribly wrong.
Oh, no, it's absolutely going to be randomly generated. That's the point. It's going to be just out of nowhere. And if that actually does happen, I apologize in advance. So what are our thoughts on Gigantify, Ron? What do you think? Is this going to be an impactful mechanic?
I hate to be super negative here, but here I go being super negative because Miniaturize I thought was very, very good. And Gigantify is kind of the opposite of Miniaturize, right? Well, as it happens, it is also the opposite of very, very good, meaning it's very, very bad. It's a terrible effect because it's way too expensive. 8-mana 8/8s don't see play pretty much ever unless they have some very significant, super important thing that they do for your deck. There's a couple that you can argue actually aren't that bad. Like there's the Flickering Lightbot for Paladin that could be broken in the future, although I don't think there's enough holy spells now to make it good enough, because, well, it's built in with discounts, so it doesn't actually cost 8 and never will. There's a decent chance, not now most likely, but in the future and future sets, this could be a 0-mana 3/3 that allows you to play a 0-mana 8/8 or something a little bit later on, and that would be very powerful. And there's one other Gigantify minion that I am impressed with because its baseline normal stats are very good. The Murloc Grofin, which is a 1-mana 1/1, and its Battlecry summons a Tiny Fin with Russian stats equal to the minion. So for 1 mana, you get a 1/1 and a 1/1 Rusher. And it puts in your hand an 8/8 minion that costs 8 that also summons an 8/8 Rusher. Now that actually does something, so I think it is like worthwhile. But most of the other ones is just like sticking keywords on, big things, and you probably just don't really get the opportunity to take advantage of it. Maybe the Geist in Death Knight isn't terrible because you get a cost reduction based on the attack, but the Gigantify is going to be too inconsistent and too expensive, so it really kind of centers around the first one, the 3-mana one, and if you can like hand buff it well enough to where its attack is big but its cost is cheap, and then you can find something good for free. So overall, though, I don't think Gigantify will be very successful, but I'm happy to be proven wrong. It'll be interesting to see how that mechanic works.
Fair enough. And you heard Ron's opinion here. Bigger is not always better. World 8, what are your thoughts on Gigantify?
I mean, I kind of saw the first one that was revealed was the Teddy, and I was kind of like, all right, this is a little bit of a snooze, because of a lot of the reasons that Ron was talking about. It's 8 mana for a giant. That seems pretty bad. And then, but as I was working through it, I'm like, well, this Grofin, like, and I'd come up with this conclusion previously. The Grofin's not bad. This is the original body is not terrible, and the 8/8, it's a pair of 8/8s for 8. It's not bad either. And then it's actually a pretty short list of minions that have Gigantify. The Lightbot, it has mana discounts on both ends of it. You have 4 holy spells, and it's a pretty compelling argument to run that. So put that one in a seems all right column. And then the Geist, actually, I would actually be interested in possibly even running the Geist without the Gigantify. So that's the Gigantify on the Geist is, for me, kind of a bonus, because I think that card in particular is just kind of interesting to begin with. It has this big incentive to run hand buff, and then you play this minion, and then it just happens to have an 8/8 attached to it, and you're like, okay, that's free is free here, in my opinion on that one. Same thing with the replicator Innator. The Gigantify on that, I don't care about. I care about the miniaturize on that card, and the Gigantify just kind of is along for the ride. So in terms of keyword success, I think miniaturize, much better keyword. But I'm not completely offended by Gigantify as like the soloists or the caravans.
Yeah.
Right? Like, so
the soloists.
Right, so you have some really bad mechanics out there, and from what I understand, Gigantify was kind of like a meme in the design room that just made it into the mini, and I think it turned out actually reasonably well given that origin. So for a new keyword, it seems fine to me. I don't think it's going to be super busted, and maybe I'll be held against that. I think it's just going to be, we're going to be running these cards anyway for the base body, is what I most likely see, and it only for two of them maybe. So mini set with 2 new keywords is actually, I think, a little bit of a rarity. Even most mini sets don't include new keywords, so it's just something a little different, and I think that was cool. But I'm not going to linger too much on it either. I mostly agree with Ron here.
So in World 8, bigger might be better than you think.
Yes.
So my thoughts on it is, I agree with both of what you're saying. The one use I can kind of see for some of these, like if the mini is good, then you get an 8/8, which is almost like Dirty Rat protection. Like, do you really want to Dirty Rat out an 8/8? So it would be like a side effect. You wouldn't run it for that. It would be like a nice little, hey, I'm running this mini anyway, so go ahead, Dirty Rat. I'll take a free 8/8, thanks.
I would love to see that, by the way. Grofin on 1, opponent plays Dirty Rat on 2. Pulls your 8/8. Like, bro, I literally just told you I have an 8/8 in my hand. That'd be fantastic.
But so, Ron, I understand you haven't been too excited about these, the one we talked about so far. Are there any cards you are excited about at this point?
I am. Also, I'd like to guess before World 8 tells you which one he's excited about, because he said I might be able to get it, and I'm curious. But first, for the one I'm excited about, to I'm sure no one's shocked if you have seen me before, Hunter's my favorite class, and there is a secret for Hunter that got printed that I believe is probably the best Hunter secret that has ever been printed. And I don't usually like Hunter secrets all that much. I don't like the secret game plan all that much. But Bargain Bin is the type of card I think that could be run in nearly any Hunter deck from now until when it rotates from Standard, because Hunter is frequently finding itself in need of some card draw. And this secret is, after your opponent plays a minion, spell, or weapon, draw a card of the other 2 types, which essentially means as soon as your opponent does literally anything on their turn, you get to draw 2 cards. it is essentially uncounterable. The only thing you could do is like location and pass or hero card and pass in order to not trigger the bargain bin, which is a very unlikely scenario to happen, through multiple turns in a row. Obviously, that couldn't happen because then they wouldn't be able to do anything, which means basically this is a guaranteed card draw. And Hunter is very, very, very happy with guaranteed card draw. And there's even a little bit of tutoring within the draw. There's some ways that opponents can possibly try to play around it or block a specific card from being drawn by playing a specific card. But essentially, you always get 2 cards, and that's always something that you're looking for. And then for my guess, just because I remember WorldEight, you were pretty big on a whole lot of Treant Druid stuff. I guess that it's Overgrown Beanstalk is the card that you're hyped about, but I don't know.
Yeah, it is.
Is that the one?
Yeah.
Hey, I knew it.
Yeah.
Do we have enough Treants to support that right now, or is that more or less a wild card?
Yeah. If you didn't know, Drum Druid actually didn't lose any cards. It lost Natural Causes. That was the only card it lost. You can run the whole deck. I've got a list. I'm happy to share it. It's
ready. He's so ready.
I'm so ready. It's a beautiful list. And you run this along with Aviana, and then you have this like Countess effect to follow up when if your drums don't finish the job. It's gonna be terrific. Because that deck is so scammy. I've scammed Ron with that deck, I think like half a dozen times.
I already know what's coming. I'm going to cue into you on ladder, and you're going to beat the crap out of me with Overgrown Beanstalk over and over. You're just going to draw all the drum stuff. I'm going to get massacred. I'm mentally preparing now.
So I think it's draw for Hunter is super exciting. I agree with that. I think draw for something like the Treant Druid, it's not quite as exciting, but I just think it's cool. A little snooze because it's tribal. There's some other interesting cards in here. I think the neutrals, Dorian and Replicator are both like something you could build around and could be potentially really just absolutely like change the meta. Dorian in particular, there's some minion tutors, Dig for Treasure, Umpire's Grasp, stuff like that, where you can basically pick what you're going to get a 1/1 copy of, in addition to something like Druid and Character Artist into ENR, stuff like that, right? Like, so Dorian could pretty easily have this really, really backbreaking kind of, or not backbreaking, but like just completely create decks that we're not going to know about. So excited to see what happens there. That's going to take a little bit more deck building. There's some clear winners in this mini set, just as it being a solid mini set worth the value. And then the Replicator also kind of in that same bucket of not the 5/5 in particular, or even the Gigantify, but having the 1/1 summon duplicates of anything with 1 power, seems really good. So another card that you can build around. I think the other big standout for me is probably Part Scrapper, and that's just a lot of mana cheat. I mean, just front loading 5 mana is a huge deal, especially for a class that never has access to that level of mana cheat. The closest we have is like Steam Guardian. Man, I played that card hundreds of times. Warrior just doesn't cheat mana, so it'll be really interesting to see between that and Chemical Spell if there's a new deck that comes out of it. But yeah, the one card that I'm excited for personally is the Beanstalk, because I like Drum Druid. Almost no one does, but it's a deck that I enjoy, so I'm excited for the card. What about you, Tito? What are you looking forward to?
Well, on the Replicator, I really, really hope they have some Professor Doofenshmirtz flavor text, because if they don't, that's a big mess. The card that I think I'm most excited for right now is Product 19. And that's specifically because currently right now I am playing, like I said, Egg Druid, and I'm playing it with the secret package. So I'm playing the Titan Forge traps, I'm playing the bait and switches, I'm playing the hidden meetings, I'm probably going to be playing the bargain bin. And now pop an egg, get a 0 mana, play all your secrets again with a 4/4 body. Yes, please. I'm very excited about that. I think the Replicatinator is going to be interesting, along with the Flickering Light bot in, say, a buff paladin, because you get the mini or the buff or whatnot, and then you can buff those up, and you play a 1 mana, play your 1 mana, get 2 of the same card for 1 mana that has been buffed with your buff paladin. I think that could be very much interesting. But for the most part, I'm very excited about Product 9. I think that's going to be a lot of fun. Okay, but let's talk about, are there any cards that have you worried, Ron?
I mean, probably Dorian. Yeah, Puppet Master Dorian is the capabilities with that card are kind of terrifying. It is a 4 mana 2/6, so there's a good level of slowness attached to it. But there's plenty of different tutor effects, like WorldEight was mentioning. Even something just as simple as like a Shopper Demon Hunter, where you could coin out the 4 mana weapon on turn 3, and then you could swing that weapon, and then you could play Puppet Master Dorian on turn 4 and swing the weapon again. And you've guaranteed that you are going to draw the Shopper, and now you also get a 1/1 copy of that Shopper that will give you a 1/1 copy of that Shopper. That's a lot of Magtheridons, or, chances to roll Magtheridons, just as like an early easy example of it. But there's also plenty of people have been pointing out already that Highlander Warrior can build their deck in such a way that, basically the caricature artist will always draw something that they really, really want, whether it's like Bran or Boom Boss. And then Dorian might be getting a 1/1 copy of a Boom Boss, and it's going to double that battle cry and really go crazy with the bombs and basically just ruin your opponent's entire everything in that game, I guess. So I don't know. There's some messy things that could happen with that. Maybe it'll be too slow. Maybe it'll be too inconsistent. But the capabilities that it represents are something that I am certainly concerned about. So we'll see what happens.
How about yourself, WorldEight? Any cards you're concerned about?
I kind of jumped the show notes there and, included the first 2 categories together. But yeah, Dorian is the biggest one that I'm really concerned about. I'm not too actually thrilled about the some of the other cards being around. We'll see how Puppet Theater plays out. I think that could lead to some real snooze games, because you don't want to. It just feels bad. They have it sitting there. You don't want to play your good card, because they'll get a copy of your good card. And so it's not so much maybe a level, like a power level there. It's going to feel awful to play against. And I'm also worried about the bomb package in general. Again, that's just encouraging a type of gameplay that I don't like to play against, where, it's just like tank up, rank up, and that's Bomb Warrior, and we have multiple cards that are going to support that. And not like worried about the power level so much as just worried about, grinding half an hour game just to, I don't know if I'm going to win or not. I have to wait it out. And that's just not my kind of Hearthstone.
At least there was the foresight with the bomb theme to not attach it to a battle cry effect. That would have been extra messed up considering the existence of Bran. But yeah, I get you for sure.
Yeah, well, I mean, you could still, use the warrior weapon with Safety Expert. Right? Oh, no, it doesn't have taunt. No, it's a mech death rattle. Yeah, you can use the...
yeah, you could, but that also requires different deck building and pivoting even further in a direction away from the Highlander stuff, which weakens the Highlander stuff a little bit. So I don't hate that quite as much. But if they had just put that on a death rattle where all you have to do is just add this one, or not death rattle, on a battle cry where all you have to do is just add this one copy of this card that also has a broken battle cry effect that is exceptionally disruptive things for your opponent, I think that would be pretty unhealthy. So I'm glad they, planned that in advance and said, okay, none of these bomb shuffling effects will be death rattles. I think that was at least a good decision.
Yeah.
And for me, I agree with you on Puppet Theater. Although I really look forward to playing that card against a warrior where I then take their boom boss and then I celestial it and then I synchronize it and I just throw lots of bombs in their deck and smile and enjoy. But yeah, I think that's going to be eventually nerfed to say choose one enemy minion cannot target Titans. Get a 1/1 copy of it that costs 1. I think that is coming at some point, but I could be wrong. But I mean that's the one that worries me the most. I think Dorian. I mean I could say the same thing about Dorian, but I think also Dorian possibly has some fun. We'll see. So do we think those are the cards that worry us? Do we think any of them are going to be like the Reno or the Yogg from this mini set, like these meta warping cards? Like I know we mentioned a couple worry about. Do we think any of them are going to be warping? Ron, what do you think?
I mean, not at all in the way that the cards you named are. There's nothing that comes close to approaching that kind of power level on first glance. Where like Yogg right off the bat, people looked at the card and they're like, wait, so I could probably make this free pretty quick and do disgusting things. Or, Reno, the strongest, most powerful defensive tool maybe ever printed. It's hard to compare, those kinds of cards with what we have in this mini set. There are a few things that maybe could be some meta warpers or, power outliers. Dorian is the first thing that comes to mind. If it's good, it could very much warp the meta. But there's not a whole lot of other things based on their effects that I'm really all that concerned about. I think overall this looks like a slightly lower power level mini set.
How about yourself, WorldEight?
So yeah, I agree with Ron in the fact that nothing stands out like Reno, Yogg, as in this is why was this card printed? this doesn't look at the same power level as anything else. The rest of this, but we've also had mini sets with Construct Quarter where that was that stood out and it was like what are the numbers on this thing? This is way overtuned. And when it was appropriately tuned after 2 nerfs, it was like, okay, well, it's almost unplayable. But on initial release, everyone saw it and it totally broke everything. I'm not seeing quite the same here. I think there is some possibility. So we'll definitely see. I mentioned Part Scrapper, potentially opening up some pretty broken play patterns for Warrior. I'm hesitant because it is a bit of setup, but it is a lot of mana cheat. I mean, five mana cheats. You can do a lot with that. So, that's one of the cards that I look at and I'm like, that's a big number to attach to something where I'm like that. I could see that being nerfed to 4, very quickly, as an example. So we'll see. But nothing quite strikes me as the same level as, I mean, Yogg was just so ridiculous. Like, I have no idea how the card got printed the way it did.
I think there was also, were they mini set cards as well? Pendant of Earth and Shattered Reflections? Because I remember those being like, you immediately look at them and you're like, wait, excuse me, what? How did this get printed? I don't get that kind of vibe from this mini set.
Yeah, those were also mini set cards that I do not see here.
And thankfully, they got nerfed before Priest found a way to do anything with them. Priest paid for the Druid's crimes on those. So we did talk a little bit about the cards that might accentuate some existing archetypes. Looking at the cards we have now in this mini set, do we think there are any new archetypes that might spawn because of the cards that are now available on the mini set? What do you think, WorldEight?
Well, I mentioned Bomb Warrior, so that seems pretty they laid that one out for us, right? They're like, here's some bomb cards, go for it. I think something a little more subtle is maybe an aggro DH here with the Slither Spear. It's a pretty aggressive curve to go Slither into Spirit of the Team. Like, that is a strong start. Even without Grasp, I mean, we still have the I forget the other 1/3 that gains attack. I can't remember it, totally blanking. But DH has got some good starting aggressive cards. We've been focused on Shopper, but could potentially open up the door there with another. These aggressive decks need their good 1-drops. They're the backbone of the deck, and I could see Slither Spear being a backbone of an aggressive DH deck. But yeah,
Sharpshooter does still exist, by the way, and Sharpshooter decks very much want to draw a lot of cards and play copies of momentum, which means that this little 1/3 could be absolutely terrifying. It's sort of like a must-remove minion whenever it's on the board if you know that you're up against a Sharpshooter Demon Hunter, because if they're doing their Sharpshooter turn and this minion is able to attack face, you might be getting hit in the face with, 3 or more momentums and some other attack buffs that also will go on this minion too, and boom, you're dead. So I could see that. That's a very strong looking aggressive card and premium statted as a 1-mana 1/3.
Does Dorian find its way into a Sharpshooter?
Probably not. I mean, maybe. I'm not smart enough to make that deck if it does work, but it's just that you have to invest so much in it. It's so expensive. I don't think Sharpshooter Demon Hunter can afford to find a turn to play the Dorian. And if you are running a deck that main decks Dorian and you get it on the board, it's pretty much a minion that is screaming, kill this right now, because there's probably some plan to exploit it, which means you'd kind of have to, in order to make it consistent, play it on the same turn that you're doing all of the things. And I don't think you have enough mana to do that. You, instead of spending 4 mana on Dorian to play Sharpshooter and Dorian and draw things to make copies of things, you're probably just playing Sharpshooter and using that 4 mana to murder them instead.
Fair enough. What do you think, WorldEight? Are there any? Well, we already mentioned Ron. Do you have any thoughts on the archetypes that might come out of this?
I don't know about necessarily like different archetypes, but some revivals of archetypes that have been gone for a little bit. Like WorldEight was big on Drum Druid, the Treant type strategy before, and I think Overgrown Beanstalk is a majorly important card to try to enable that type of strategy again. Maybe there is something there with some kind of aggressive Demon Hunter that might not necessarily be Sharpshooter focused, with the Gibbering Reject, which is an interestingly powerful card in its like overall effect if it sticks, but it's a little bit too low statted to be enough of a threat. There's way too many like AoE effects that would just wipe out the whole board of rejects, but you can't ignore them, which does have value. And then beyond that, I think there's a little bit there with the No Minion Mage that was not very good on release in this expansion, but Malfunction is a card that is extremely important for a No Minion Mage deck that could maybe help it rise to the forefront again of prevailing mage strategies. If there is something that's good for mage, it might need to be just no minion style, because now there's another support card for it. But I don't see any like real obvious emerging brand new archetypes that are going to come out of this mini set.
I do want to
okay.
So I'm just going to jump in here for 2 things. First, with the spell mage, I think there is an interesting approach to building it like old spell Demon Hunter, which hasn't really been tackled too much. Vicious Syndicate kind of came out with a list that was, I thought was pretty close to something that would look like you just ship all of your spells face. You don't care about the board at all. Like every old spell DH, you attacked face, and minions on the board were just, if they lived, who cared? If they died, who cared? Everything goes face. And mage maybe has a critical amount of damage to do that, and malfunction might allow it to. If you have a manufacturing error and you know that manufacturing error is going to allow you to clear an opponent board without really caring about it, it might be able to push it over the edge. We'll see. And then the other one that I want to mention is Rocket Hopper. There's a very niche overload shaman out there right now that's surprisingly good. And this might be one of the cards that pushes that over the, might also push it to, like, this is the last card that it needed to be pretty competitive. Because you don't look at the Overload 4 as a disadvantage. You look at it as, oh, well, now I'm going to Overdraft for 4. I'm going to Thorum for 4. This is something I actually want to do.
It's tough. I mean, that's pretty optimistic because you can't on curve play Rocket Hopper and then follow up with Thorum because you'll be too overloaded. So you kind of have to have Overdraft or have it much later in the game, which reduces its effectiveness. Maybe it could work. Rocket Hopper and Overdraft are a match made in heaven together, but God help you if you have one and not the other in your hand.
Fair enough. I'm just happy if they're not killing me on turn 6 from 29, even with a full board. So I agree. Now, and one thing to think about on the Gibbering Reject, it's not a 4-mana 3/3. It's a 4-mana 6/5. So, because you're going to get it off of the shopper probably more often than not. So all you got to do is wait till turn 9, play your Gibbering Reject, and then play Going Down Swinging, and you got a nice board. But that's optimistic.
Yeah, turn 9. Yeah, a whole bunch of 3/3s. That's what I'm looking to do in standard right now.
6/5s. 6/5s.
They would never.
No,
clear
they're not copies.
A 5-health board.
Tito, they're not copies.
Oh, yeah. Bummer.
It'll summon a base copy. So, but that's good for the Shopper Mini. So you pick this off the Shopper Mini, you play the 1/1, you attack, and then you get the 3/3, and then it'll start getting out of control. It's not like the original Trog where it's summoning whatever buffed version of it you have.
Again, not great to flood the board with 3/3s in the current meta because there are a ton of AoE effects that handle 3 health on board pretty easily, but just the mere fact that it can't be ignored and is a critical mass of additional threats and things that prompt the use of more board clears might be something that's important. And those are a really good point about the mini, because there's so many bad outcomes on the Shopper Mini right now where you're like, well, I sure hope it's Magtheridon or I don't know, the secret one, I guess. I hope it's Magtheridon. Now you're like, okay, there's like another one that you're not too upset about rolling, and that would be the Reject. So it's like, okay, cool. Well, I can play a 1/1 and attack with my face and get a 3/3 as well. And that 3/3 will give me another 3/3 when I attack. So they have to pay attention to it. That's a good thing for that deck.
And I'm actually glad that I'm wrong and it's not going to work like the original Trog, because I misread that because normally it's like make a copy, and you know how that's gone in the past.
Oh yeah, I mean if it just made copies of itself and you could start buffing it, that might actually make it kind of broken.
So we did not even really go through card by card or even class by class, and that still took a while. And dear listener, I know you're thinking that was a great show. We're just getting started. So our main topic today is planning out turns ahead of time. And this is something that I know that both WorldEight and Ron do very well, so I thought it was good to have them both on to talk about this because I thought it'd be interesting. So typically when you play Hearthstone, most people, they might be on their phone watching TV, playing another game, who knows, or even if you're there, you take a turn, you watch your opponent do something, you see what you draw, you make a play. But the real good Hearthstone players have already thought about this and thought about the next turn and the turn after, and maybe even the turn after. So just a couple guidelines here. As always, when we have Ron on the show, the things we are discussing are not hard and fast rules. You will hear "it depends" a lot during this conversation. So just remember that. Like, we're not giving you the playbook, we're giving you the guideline to a playbook. But it's one thing to know the game plan for your deck. Like, if you're playing buff paladin, you want to buff things and play big things. If you know the general game plan, you know the strengths, you know the weaknesses, but I think that's a little different than planning your turns. And you can plan your turns out ahead to have a better advantage to execute the game plan that you know your deck can do, and hopefully put your opponent on the back foot. So I think we should start with some basics. And kind of the things I came up with are, there's some general things you should think about when you're planning out your turns. Ron, why don't you start with the first one, pressure? What do you think we should be thinking about as far as pressure with planning out our future turns?
So pressure, as simply as I can put it, is just basically making your opponent respond to what you're doing in probably a way that they would rather not respond to. Your typical control deck would love to just sit back and wait and maybe armor or draw and collect resources and use their board clear at the most optimal time when you've fully overextended and you have this giant board of things, and they play their one card to wipe out your 6 or 7 cards. Haha, game over type of situation. And pressure essentially is that proactive, like, initiative element of the game where it's like, okay, I need this minion or a couple minions that are representing enough damage sustained over the course of a few turns that it starts to get very uncomfortable for my opponent. You're not necessarily looking at your life total on turn 1. You're like, yeah, I'm at 30. I'm going to be at 30 for a little bit, or maybe, in the high 20s, whatever. All of a sudden, they're at like 18 health on turn 3 because these minions are hitting them hard and fast. And now maybe the game plan that they had starts to be compromised. And when you are making someone change their game plan or compromise elements of their game plan, it starts to kind of just chip away at their overall win conditions and how they can actually get to that point that they want to be. And pressure is, with most proactive aggressive decks, the number one way to force that type of uncomfortable situation to put yourself in a more favorable spot.
WorldEight, anything you'd like to add to that?
Everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth.
Thank you, Mike Tyson.
Great Tyson quote, yeah. Love it.
Which is just like, I think that's, you come into the, you've picked your deck out, your opponents pick their deck out, you get queued into each other, or you're in a tournament and you both have this initial strategy and you have some goal, and whatever you do that is taking away from your opponent's goal, yeah, that's the pressure. That's the, you punch them in the mouth kind of move that they can't pursue theirs without ignoring you. I think Ron did a great job of summarizing that. But I just want to toss that quote in there because
it's fun.
Yeah, it's a great way to sum up what I described too. Basically, it's very, very much boils down to Mike Tyson. Listen to the wise words of Mike Tyson. Everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth.
And collect pigeons.
Love it.
But I mean, to a good point of that is sometimes, like Ron was saying, you know what their game plan is. You know what the warrior wants to do, the control warrior, the control priest, or even the aggro hunter or something. You know what their plan is. So your goal is to try to disrupt that plan. So if you can plan out ahead of time, because you know what they're going to do, and then you can be ready to change that direction. And that might mean making suboptimal plays in order to have that pressure. Like if you are trying to get a board to make the warrior respond, maybe you have something like a Yodeler that you want to save for something, but playing a 4-3 because this is your best pressure play right there might be the best option there, because you plan, you're like, my job is to get them down to 18, get them down to 15, so they don't have time to play Brand, so they don't have time to play their slower plays and have to react to yours, so that way you can get there. So pressure is something that I think a lot of people, including myself, don't really handle that well, like, and understand that well often, is you want to make that happen. But what about...
I do want to, if I have a second here, I do want to say there is different types of pressure. If I play a early 1-drop, let's say my Vicious Slither Spear, that represents a different level of pressure than, my Thorn Mantle, right? Like they're both 1/3s, but the Slither Spear has a much higher cap of how much damage it might present, right? Maybe I'm also running bananas, things like that. In the same context, if I'm up against a control deck, maybe they think, oh, I'm just going to shrug off the Slither Spear. But if I drop a Gold Panner, they represent that the draw engine there is a significant threat. Like they have to get rid of that. They have to do anything they can to get rid of that draw engine. So there is different types of pressure too. Depending on what you're up against. Whereas a Gold Panner in a different matchup, aggressive versus aggressive matchup, it's just a 1/2, and it's going to be quickly irrelevant. It's not putting stats on the board, things like that. So I just want to make that point that yes, pressure could be, you're hitting them in the face with minions, but it could also represent, I play a lot of decks that are kind of snowbally, Enrage was a love of mine, and an Anima Extractor on curve was a 1/4 that represented an enormous amount of pressure. Or Observer of Myths right now is a similar card. Like the actual card itself doesn't represent pressure, but the potential does.
Yeah, and just playing that
really
card out.
Yeah,
just playing that card out. Like I have often when I'm playing that deck or a version of that deck, I've played Observer of Myths. Even if I don't have something to follow it up with, I plan on going in a different direction, because I'm kind of representing pressure, and that can be that goes into our next thing, and they're going to want to deal with that, and if they're spending the effort to deal with that, then I am positioned to be in a better play of whatever I wanted to do next, because they wanted to deal with that, and now they've kind of almost like a gambit there. But I think that kind of goes along with our next two things. I think we can kind of combine them. Really, is protection of future assets and baiting. I think they're not one and the same, but I think they kind of they're sisters at least. So WorldEight, what are your thoughts on like protecting future assets and baiting as far as planning your turns ahead of time?
It's something we definitely want to consider, because we only have a certain number of card slots in our deck. Not all cards go into our deck at an equal power level. We have cards that are going to be very impactful to our game, and often we only have 2 of them. We want to make the most out of them. We were just talking about Observer or Miss. We don't really want to play it and then it have just be the 1/4 body. We do want to get some buffs out of that. And so that's a valuable asset. Whereas a monkey out of a barrel of monkeys, right, that would be the decoy. That would be the, I'm sacrificing the pawn in chess kind of move to protect this other valuable asset. And so we should be willing to give up the low impact minions or cards in order to keep our high impact cards, because those cards ideally will be doing the work of not just another card, but several other cards all at once, or maybe even providing something completely unique to the game that nothing else in the deck might provide. Think Titans. We have the one Titan, and we better make the most use out of it that we can for the 3 activations. So we do want to plan around how do we get value out of these high impact cards. Do we... I think Titans are in particular, now that I've mentioned it, are a great way to, like, I'm going to play my Titan and I want to do the most I can with it. And so what are the steps the turn before, the 2 turns before, that maybe lead me to this high impact turn with it, like my Amatus. I want to have a wide board when I play Amatus and buff everything. That's a very simple example. So, we do want to focus on our strategy. What's our general strategy? What are the key components to it? When we use those key components, we want to make the most out of them, and it's okay to sacrifice the pawns to make the most use out of the queen. Going back to that chess analogy.
Well, it's also sometimes it's the opposite, right? Sometimes you sacrifice the queen so that the pawns can do the work, and sometimes, like, I know there's been more than one time, and I'm focusing on Hunter because I've spent the last month playing it. But like, I'll play the Hunter Titan and get the 5-mana 5/2 weapon and hit him in the face, knowing that they're going to highly prioritize using their removal on it, so therefore I can follow it up with whatever high impact play I'm going to. And I'm less worried about protecting the Titan. I'm more worried about using it to draw something out in order to react to it. Ron, what are your thoughts on this topic?
Yeah, I think good points so far from both of you. It's something you have to be very aware of when you're playing the game, for which assets are the most important to you in your overall game plan, how your deck plays, and also for this particular game, which relates to, well, what does the board state look like? What's my opponent's health look like? What's my total amount of cards in hand, and what's the makeup of my hand, and how does it direct me towards the game plan that I want to execute here? How many cards do they have? Have they telegraphed anything in particular that I can kind of anticipate? Especially when it comes to baiting, I would say Warrior is probably one of the most obvious. Nature Shaman maybe being like right up there along with it, where Warrior is typically always Highlander Warrior at this point in time, and there are 2 Forge cards that they would run, and that would be Bellowing Flames and Sanitize. And when you see the Warrior Forge, usually on turn 2, you're expecting that Bellowing Flames is probably coming. So then you want to make your future plays either in such a way where you play around Bellowing Flames as best you can to make it least effective, or you have a follow-up play that would be very strong right after they use their Bellowing Flames. You try to do something to bait it out. You're like, okay, I need them to play this card that ruins my plan so that I can have my actual good plan. So I need to make them think in some way or another that this is my plan right now, and this is the best time for them to use their card that they've sort of telegraphed that they have, and then I play that. Similar with if it's Sanitize, okay, that's going to be dealing 4 damage to the board or more if they have armor. So you need to probably take away the armor that they have and then try to make a board that has more than 4 health, or have death rattles or something else that sort of counters that. Beyond all that, maybe it's just like, okay, can I make a threatening enough board that tells them I need to Sanitize with the plan to follow up on the very next turn after they've played that card with a much more threatening board that they no longer have the good answer card to. Outside of that, there's also just Nature Shaman, where it usually centers around like you've already planned for this to be a deck that you might encounter, and you have specific disruption cards. Nature Shaman has to tell you by the nature of how it works that, they're playing Flash of Lightning here, or maybe another Flash of Lightning. So their next turn, they're going to try to do a whole bunch of discounted things and maybe kill you. And that's when you play the Cult Neophyte or the Speaker Stomper that specifically ruins their entire game plan that they just set up. And that's something that you're like, well, I need to hold this card. I need to make sure, even though it would be better in this spot objectively most of the time, there's that one specific thing I haven't seen that I know they run that is basically the winner. So let me wait and then play it at the appropriate time.
I can say I learned this lesson the hard way multiple times when I was playing Pure Paladin. Pure Paladin likes to go tall for the most part, right? You build some things, you get you make copies of things. You had the Garden's Grace, and I can't tell you how many times I would make my plays, and then Reska would then steal one, or maybe 2. And it's a lesson that I learned the hard way, because it's like I just at times I would say, well, they're gonna do it, so let's do it. But like sometimes you gotta make them happen, sometimes you make it don't. But if I would have planned my turns out ahead of time, I probably could have made their rescues less optimal and then go ahead and solve that. But that's what we're talking about here. That's looking ahead. Another point on kind of planning out your turns, and this is probably one of the biggest ones you're going to hear streamers talk about, or even just coaches or whatever, is mana efficiency. You might be looking at your hand and say, oh, I can coin this out and play this minion right here. But then if you're talking to almost any good Hearthstone player worth their salt, they're going to say, okay, what are you playing next turn? Like, does coining that card out set you up to have a better turn next turn? How are you spending your mana next turn, assuming that draw regardless, unless you have like a low to ground deck where the mana kind of lands up? Like, if I coin this out, does that even out my curve? Do I get to spend my mana efficiently? Or am I just kind of setting myself up to have a bad next turn, or maybe even a bad next couple turns, and just have my thing die anyway? WorldEight, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, I think the coin is one of the most powerful cards that goes into half of the decks, right? So it's the coin. If I am watching anyone, I will tend to just jump in and spectate a lot of people on my friends list, and they're usually pretty cool with it. A lot of players don't use the coin to great efficiency. I'm just blown away with how people use the coin, because you're trying to overcome this huge hurdle of going second, and this is really your only tool to do so. Both players in the game have roughly the same number of mana crystals, except that the first player is going to always have more mana crystals. So spending mana efficiently is the great equalizer. If you could do it better than your opponent, spend your mana better than your opponent, you are more likely to win. It's such a that is one of the easiest and most powerful ways to improve your gameplay. It's something that I still work on every time I play. Every game I play, I know I think about, did I spend this mana as efficiently as I could? And that's a whole topic. I'll just leave it at that. But it's planning out how to do that. A lot of it is what are the specific, strong, powerful strategic moves am I looking to do in this game? How do I lead up to those points? And what are the mana break points? Kind of like, where do I need to get to along the way? Specifically, we mentioned briefly earlier on with Drum Druid or something like that. I play a version of the deck that really wants to land Drum Circle on 5. Like that's the whole point of the deck, right? And a lot of that deck is planning out everything from turn 2 as to how to do it. And it's all about mana efficiency. Like, you cannot waste a single crystal on anything extraneous if you want to do that one particular trick. It's a very good trick. It can be beat, but that's the trick you're trying to do. With that deck, you have to plan out your mana down to the last crystal. So yeah, that's a pretty in-depth topic. I feel like I didn't even answer the question, other than yes, mana is a fundamental part of doing your powerful plays and staying ahead in the game.
You heard it, WorldEight and both Jesse Pickman say, don't waste your crystal. Ron, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think efficiency is probably one of the number one steps to master as you're getting familiar with the game. I essentially kind of drilled it into my head when I started improving at the game, where it's like, okay, there's one unbreakable rule of Hearthstone, which is always, always, always spend all of your mana on every turn. And then as soon as I completely internalized that and made that the unbreakable rule, the second part of that is, okay, sometimes don't spend all of your mana. Because there are situations that involve some of the other aspects that we're talking about: anticipation, your game plan, your plan for what's better for you, and how you efficiently spend your mana over the course of the next turn or 2 turns or multiple turns, depending on what your deck is. For instance, like WorldEight's Drum Druid, where it's very important to structure things in just such a way to pull off the power turn or power sequence that you're trying to do that gives you the best chance of winning. So in general, though, it's pretty much just best, like, if you have 3 mana available and a 3 mana card in hand and nothing else that's playable, you should probably play that 3 mana card. You know, it sort of goes without saying. The card is glowing green, green card good, get it on the board, do the thing, and that will ultimately help you win more Hearthstone games than lose them. But there's a whole lot of nuance that comes attached to that, with different game states, matchups, your deck, their deck, and so on and so forth, where you start to understand the nuance and how you want to approach the game. Maybe there are multiple options that are available. You have a 1 mana card, you have a 2 mana card, you have a 3 mana card, you have 3 mana available. You have a deck that's full of other 1 mana cards, so maybe the 1 and 2 is best to play on turn 3 because you're probably going to draw a 1 and then you'll play a 3 and a 1 on the next turn, and that's how you're efficient over the course of the next 2. As just a early preliminary example without using any specific decks or anything like that. But as long as you are trying to find the most optimized way to leverage your advantage the most, taking into account the effects of the cards themselves and what they do and how they impact the game situation, while efficiently spending all of the mana that's available to you, that usually does you the best service to yourself, to give yourself enough of an advantage to get into that type of situation where you can win the game.
Fair enough. And yeah, mana efficiency is... It can even be maybe not playing all your cards. It could be, well, I can play, if I have 5 mana, I'm going to play this. I can play this 3 mana and this 2 mana card, or I can play the 3 mana card and hero power because the 2 mana card might be better on turn 6 when I can play a 4 mana card and a 2 mana card, or whatever it might be. It's kind of evaluating everything, right?
You know what, Tito? It depends.
It depends. That's right. And I think it depends.
It's just that Hearthstone is so intensely context-based that you could probably provide an example of nearly anything where it was wrong to do this thing or it was right to do this thing because of the specific context, that in a vacuum it'd be like, oh, well, I would have said the opposite otherwise.
And also keep in mind that you could make the right play. You can make the play you should have, and it could still fail. It could still lose. And it doesn't mean that you didn't make the right play. Because 9 times...
What? Are you talking about, like, agency? Like, feeling a lack of age in today's Hearthstone? No, Tito, I don't think I've ever heard anyone say anything about something like that.
Fair enough. And our final kind of bullet point here, before we get to, like, more specific situations, is I put down anticipation. And sometimes we're saying, hey, given the cards you have, and given what you're trying to do, play them, get them out there and do your thing. But that's not always the case, right? Sometimes you have to anticipate what your opponent's going to do. And yes, I could play this. And sometimes it's you want to go and make them have the cards. And sometimes the longer you wait, like, hey, if I play this, if they have this, I should wait for this. Sometimes it's bad because the longer you wait, the longer you give them the chance to find the powerful things or whatever you worry about. But sometimes it also, depending on the matchup and how familiar you are with it and what's going to happen, it's good to anticipate what they're going to do. My example today was I've been playing with the Egg Hunter. This keeps coming up. And just recently I've added the Bestial Wrath. Is that what it's called? Give all your
yes.
Yeah, give all your minions +1/+1. And what I realized in that after playing a bunch of the Egg matchup is when I have a 7 mana plush, That then allows me to send back all the Ziliaxes that the warrior who's already played Bran now gets 3 Ziliaxes that are 6/5s with divine shields. I can then save that plush if it makes sense at that time at 9 mana to then ship those all back to his deck, and therefore his boom guy is not going to summon 4 more of them because they didn't die. And I was anticipating what they were going to do, and I reacted to it. And that may not always be the right play. WorldEight, what do you think about anticipation?
Also, you better hope they don't top deck one of those 3 Ziliaxes you just put back in their deck to make 3 more.
Yeah, that happened to me today, and I was sad.
Yeah.
I think that a lot of players, when they queue on ladder, most players are taking a deck that they pulled, that they net decked, right? Most players are not creating their own decks, and so what that ends up happening is that if you go on ladder, you will see the same decks over and over and over again. There's a little bit of diversity, but you will see another result of that is the same play patterns over and over again. You will see a Crazed Conductor on 4. You know that's kind of coming. You can, anticipate sometimes it doesn't help. You can anticipate the Ziliax on 9 and you've got your plush, but so sometimes it does help, right? With the Conductor, maybe I've got a way to address all the 3/3s that come out with it. This was very prevalent with when Shopper was popular, right? Like almost every game was Instrument Tech into Grasp into Shopper. Like it was.
Did you draw your Glacial Shard?
Yeah. Because at that time when that was popular, I was running a lot of Zarimi Priest, and I was running the Gyre Worm, right? And so I would keep the Gyre Worm foraging on 2, and I would let them do their whole song and dance, and then with the anticipation that as a counterplay, my Gyre Worm would snipe their Shopper as soon as it came down. It was very effective. And so it's nice in a certain. It's one of the reasons that you should know your matchups. Either play them out yourself. You can watch great streamers like Ron or Tito playing decks, so you don't have to. You can watch them at double speed on Twitch. I've done that many times of many streamers to see what these play patterns are, and if you know what your opponent's going to do, you can ideally build your strategy knowing that as part of it. Ron mentioned the Forge before. The Forge is a clear indicator of what they have, for better or worse. And another way you can adapt to that is you can either change your strategy. You can also change your deck. I've started adding Fly Off the Shelves to my Zarimi Priest. It's been absolutely terrific. It's not for everybody. The list has to change a little bit, but that's kind of the player I am. Is I go into the deck builder and I'll do something like that because I know that if I'm facing all of these Warlocks with all these 3/3s, Fly Off the Shelves, I just need two dragons in the hand, and I let them do their little pop off, and then I counterplay and then hit them in the face, and it's been that works great. So the anticipation is a way of taking momentum back when you know that they're going to have their powerful play, and then you hit them right back with your own. Sometimes you can't do anything about it, which is very frustrating. That's the kind of the joke right now is I don't have any agency because I know my opponent's going to do something powerful. He does it, and then I couldn't do anything about it. But sometimes you can either adjust your plan in the game, or you can adjust your plan before the game even starts if you know what the meta looks like.
And I really hate when WorldEight comes into my stream and says, Tito, talk twice as fast. It's really hard to do, but I'm there to help out. And the one downside about anticipation, I would say, well, not the one side, but it's great for planning out your turns, but it's also kind of tilting at times when you kind of anticipate what they're going to play, and you're like, oh, here comes the Trial by Fire. Oh, here comes the Sanitize. Well, here comes Reno. And that anticipation can sometimes be a negative if it's not used in the right way. But
Yeah, I was Ron, I was on your stream. I don't know if it was last night, 2 nights ago, and you were playing against a warrior, and you're like, well, as long as they don't have Brawler on the next turn, then they had Brawler. And it's like, as long as they don't have the sanitized
Yes.
goggle on the next turn, they had sanitized goggle. As long as they don't have the Zilliax on the next turn, then you conceded.
I'm like calling out the outs because there's like literally like it's such a small amount of things that they could possibly have that are perfect for the situation, and it's the singleton text. So it's like there are only one copy of these cards, and I see that they have like 16 cards in their deck. So realistically, said card that I'm afraid of could be in that bottom 16. It's not. Oh, of course it's not. It's always in their hand. Obviously. Yeah.
And
it just, it leads to frustration, but there's not much you can do about it. You just kind of, at a certain point, you're like, well, I hope they don't have the card.
Actually, that was your first 3 games yesterday, if I recall.
I was getting a little tilted on the first 3 games.
Yes, I do.
It wasn't a great start to the stream.
All right. So I don't want to get too deep into this first bullet point because this is an entire episode on its own, but it's definitely worth at least cursory going over. And that is probably, I would think, is one of the most important parts of your game of Hearthstone, and that is the mulligan. And mulligan is where you can do some planning out of your first few turns, which is kind of one of the most important things, I think, in the game. So, Ron, what are your thoughts on planning out multiple turns from the mulligan? Again, I know this is a full topic episode, but let's try to keep it short.
First off, I just have to say that the mulligan is probably one of the most difficult aspects of the entire game, and also maybe one of the most overlooked aspects of the entire game. Multiple top-level pros still will tell you that they don't really know what all of the correct mulligan decisions are, and we're still lacking on a lot of stats with mulligans and like ways to fully optimize it, because there's the cards that you generally should be keeping just in a vacuum most of the time. These are the cards that are cheaper that you should have in the early game. Then there are cards that are really good that synergize together, where you wouldn't keep this one on its own, but you would keep this one if the specific other one is also with it in your hand. And so there's a lot of gameplay decisions that get made with the opening mulligan where you're like, okay, well, I can formulate a 1, 2, 3 turn game plan just over the course of the first 3 turns of the game based on these cards that I see in my hand right now. There's a lot that goes into it, and I think mulligans are really a good way to make us all feel like idiots too, because it's really, really challenging. And I regularly feel like I'm still making suboptimal decisions in mulligan because it's also so dependent on your matchup that you're in, among other things. And for ladder also, which is the majority of the Hearthstone experience, you don't know what deck your opponent is playing. You can see the class, and you can assume it's probably this archetype, and most of the time you'll be correct. But sometimes there's a totally opposite archetype that means you should have mulliganed completely differently, and you won't know until after the game starts, and then, oops.
WorldEight, what are your thoughts?
I think, Ron, you covered a lot of great points. We're actually in a very interesting meta right now, where in the past we've had aggressive druids and ramp druids, and that was always a very difficult mulligan decision. Do I get run over by Treants, or do I anticipate that this is going to be this long, grindy game where I need a lot of value? We don't really have a lot of decks like that right now, for better or worse. We kind of had that for a minute with Warlock, where we had both like Pain Warlock and Wheel Warlock in the meta. We don't really have that. It all kind of converged on this one Insanity. Yeah, it's true. But, you were mostly concerned, am I going to die on 4 to Giants, or am I going to die on 8 to a Wheel? And those are 2 very different concerns. Mostly you didn't want to die on 4 to Giants. So in terms of mulligan as a general topic, I think it's a huge topic. Personally, I've grown to be a very aggressive mulligan. Like, if I don't see a plan in the mulligan, I'm very happy to throw away cards to find a plan. to get the ground running and then kind of figure it out after a few turns. But at the same time, I also want to rely on my deck. If my deck, I tend to play decks with lots of 1-drops, and probably not a lot of people played back in the Stormwind meta, and they were playing aggro priest back then. But in Stormwind, there was a Shadow Priest deck that ran this card, Frazzled Freshman. Frazzled Freshman is a 1/4, no text box. It's just a 1/4 priest card. And the purpose of that card in the deck was just to have a 1-drop. And a somewhat sticky 1-drop. And people would keep it in the mulligan, which was a huge mistake. The reason you don't keep it is because you ran 16 1-drops in the deck. You didn't need to keep any one particular one. You were looking for the good ones. So, when someone was recently asking Sunk, what's the mulligan for this hand buff deck? Because the hand buff paladin deck kind of looks like a mess when you mulligan for it. You're like, I'm looking for the weapon, I guess, and maybe tech. And that's actually it. That's like the mulligan. It's absurd because you don't want to keep Righteous Protector. Protector is kind of this like bait keep, because it doesn't add to your strategy. Your strategy in that deck for right now, this is I want to find my weapon. I want to buff all of my guys. It has nothing to do with this 1/1 with Taunt and Divine Shield. Pretty good minion. It is not a mulligan keep because it's not pursuing your general strategy. It's one of those like 20th to 30th cards. I even saw McBanter keep muscle the muscle mech the buff in his mulligan, and I was like, this is an awful keep. This is an absolutely terrible keep in this deck because this is a card that could easily be cut. You never keep that kind of card in the mulligan. And he didn't play it the whole game.
Yeah, I kept that card too.
You don't, and then it
I was
just
like,
it
seems fine, right?
No, it
probably
seems fine, but it's total bait because that's just a curve. It's curve filler is what it is, and it doesn't really. You can make a game plan out of it, which is nice, right? Like there's Forge on 2, play it 3. It's a plan, but a lot of decks won't give you the breathing room to do it. The important thing is to have a plan going into the match. What's my deck? What's my opponent's deck? What's the main strategy I'm trying to pursue here? And what are the cards that I'm looking to do that? A lot of the times, most games, they're going to be the same powerful cards. They're going to be the same cards I look for every single game. I'm playing Priest. I'm looking for Whelp Wrangler. It's the best card to look for. I'm looking for the Gift Wrapped Whelp. Like, those are the really good cards. There's no context needed. After that, like Ron said, there's so much context. Like, it's a very short list of always keeps. But then, I am of the opinion you can actually do really well by just going for the always keeps. Just always good for the good ones, sort it out later. And if you happen to find a pair like the Crimson Clergy and Funnel Cake, you keep that. And then otherwise, have your strategy, look for the cards that matter for that strategy for the particular match.
I think I remember that game, Ron, because you had the Goblin, the Painter. I think you had 2 Painters, and you had the Muscletron. And you were like, what the heck do I keep out of this? And it's like, well, do you keep the Goblin? Because you're going to, if you keep the Muscletron, you're going to forge it on 2 and then play it on 3. And it was a weird mulligan. It's just like that. It's like, how do you plan for that? And actually,
I mean, it's easier when you already have the weapon, which is like the one thing you're looking for. So it kind of enabled the decision to keep other things. But yeah, I'm with you for sure.
And it's just like if you have the instrument tech on 2, you do not need to keep your weapon because you're going to draw it on 2. So just toss that back, get a better card because you know what you're playing on 2. You're playing instrument tech, and this right here is kind of why I had the idea to bring you guys on to talk about this. Because so the easy thing to do with Mulligan is to look at stats, and it says, I should keep this 86% of the time, and I should keep this 90% of the time. So I have these 2 cards, so this is great. I kind of had my Star Wars moment in the last couple weeks where I just started turning off my targeting computer. I turned off HS Replay, and I'm just going by, like, I'm looking at it, and I'm trying to plan out my turns, and I'm looking, and I'm saying, all right, I have the singer on 1, right? The what was it called? The one that opera singer that draws your secrets.
Costume singer.
Costume singer. I have a costume singer,
Yes.
so I know
That's the guy.
if I keep costume singer, which is obviously one of your better plays, I'm going to have a turn 2 play no matter what. And then if depending on if I'm playing warrior, if I have egg, if I have enough to fill my curve out for 1, 2, 3, I want to keep that egg because that is my money card. And even if it may not be, I wouldn't keep it against say a hunter because I know they're going to just steamroll me with, their 1/1s and 2/2s and saddle ups. And by the time I get my egg down, I'm going to have, I'm not going to be able to scramble that egg because I'm dead. But against a slow deck like Warrior, I know I'm going to have that opportunity. So if I can plan those turns out ahead of time, then that makes a lot of sense. I'm going to be able to coin that out on 4. And if I don't coin it out on 4 unless I have an activator, like a banana or maybe even a do, because that becomes like if they're going to have a sanitize, if they're going to have a bellowing flames, that's protection against that. So there's so much planning you can do for that kind of thing. But actually the first time I made a jump in play style because of WorldEight, because of this very topic. And I don't know if you remember this WorldEight. Do you know what I'm talking about?
No.
Okay.
Sorry.
So I used to always toss 4 health loss because my plan was to drop it on a weapon, drop it on the weapon with the Wind Fury and all that, because that's the mold's value. But if you have a Divine Shield minion on 1 and you're not facing against either a Death Knight or a mage with the ping, or maybe rogue, then you play that on 1. You play 4 health loss on 2. I now have a Divine Shield 5 attack, 6 attack minion, and I've done 8 damage. And it's like, screw the extra value. Like, the value is now. The value is I'm adding that pressure. And just coming to that conclusion and I was like mind blown. I'm like, that makes so much more sense than saving it for later. And it's like, that doesn't happen every matchup, but it became the game plan. Like, you would never keep 4 health loss if you didn't have a 1-drop. But if you have that 1-drop, then you play it, and then you play something, on turn 3. And there are cards that kind of supersede this rule. Like, you have Boogie Down, you're keeping it if that's your deck. If you have Slither Spear, like, my favorite aggro play is in Hunter. Slither Spear on 1, banana, coin banana on 2. What are you going to do? And maybe I lose that game because I have the answer, but most of the time they don't have the answer. And I am just, by the time they get it down, they're down to like 15 health. And I really haven't spent that many resources. I've spent 2 cards, maybe 3 because I used the coin. And they've had to do whatever they've had to do to get rid of it. And it's that kind of planning, I think, that really makes a difference.
Yeah, dude gets all out of control, hopped up on potassium. He goes crazy.
Indeed. All right. So we've talked a little bit about, so if I have a game plan and my deck operates a certain way, I probably should try to stick to that all the time, right? Like, I shouldn't vary from that. Like, even if, like, I should always try to stay, even if I go off course a little bit, I should try to get right back on that game plan, right, Ron?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Hearthstone is definitely a game where you would never deviate from your one linear strategy, and double down, triple down even. It's not context based at all. Just go all out. Complexity is for suckers.
Yeah, but in all seriousness, this is one of the things I think we all have seen is you see some people, you're doing something, and then you see somebody play the next thing, like almost like when you call Xfinity and you are trying to get them to fix your router, and you know more than them, and you know they're going off the script, and you're like, can we just skip these steps and do something different, because something different is what's going to fix things. I didn't.
I love the shots fired at Xfinity.
I didn't have this experience this week where I spent an hour with Xfinity until I found out they didn't even add my MAC address for my new router yet, so that's why none of this was working. But
surely not.
Anyway,
yeah.
But I think that's one of the big things about this is, like, you have to keep in mind your game plan. But
yes, in seriousness, as an answer to your question, you do want to make decisions ultimately that support your overall game plan, whatever it might be. There's plenty of different decks to go for, and usually those types of decks fall into kind of prescribed different styles of gameplay, whether it be like a control deck or a combo deck or an aggressive deck. So you have to keep an eye on, what are the remaining resources left in your deck and what works best for your overall game plan. But there are plenty of times where you need to deviate from that game plan, maybe even play completely counter to the strategy of what you normally would play. There have been plenty of times where your aggressive deck needs to play control, where your control deck needs to all of a sudden become the beatdown deck because due to the context of your hand or the game state of your opponent's hand, whatever it might be, the game is pushing itself in a direction that is not really in line with what your overall game plan would be, but you can spot, the type of gameplay that sets you up over the course of 1, 2, maybe 3 turns, where this is the route to take that gives me the best chance of success, or the best way to leverage an advantage, or maybe even to win the game over the course of 1 or 2 turns. There are also elements where, okay, yeah, I could try to deviate from my game plan, but it realistically doesn't pan out in a way that I have a higher likelihood of winning. So, like, there are other situations where you do actually have to just double down and be like, nope, this is the only way that I win. And it's important to be able to recognize those types of game situations when it happens. For instance, not too long ago, I was in a Hunter mirror, and my opponent made a gigantic board and also played Saddle Up. And prior to that point, I was actually playing a little bit more of a controlling style because I had the advantage, and if I could prevent them from making a wide board, which I had been doing and leveraging the advantage on the board, I was eventually going to just win on board control and damage. But all of a sudden, they made this impossible to remove board, and now I needed to completely ignore it and say, all right, here on out, it's a race now. And my deck is aggressive. It leans aggressive, wants to push face damage. It might have been better at other points in this game to try to focus on clearing up stuff. Not anymore. It's full send because I have multiple damage cards still in my deck that I can draw. And if I draw one of them on the next turn, I win the game. And if I do any other game plan, because they can't kill me yet, I will sacrifice too much damage, and I will always lose over the course of 2 games. So I give myself an out in order to have a chance to win. So even within like that concept, it depends.
And yeah, it even depends. That same matchup over 2 different games could play out entirely different. You could be playing, say,
Absolutely.
like a Flood Paladin versus the Token Hunter. And in one matchup, you say, well, I have enough tools to keep them off the board, run them out of stuff, and then I can kind of hit some power cards later. Where there's other times where you're like, they're just going to overrun me, so I kind of have to ignore what they're going to do and hit them in the face. I think a game against you I had where the biggest mistake I made was popping some of your 1/1s or your 1 minute because they had Saddle Up, and I killed them, and then you had a 2/5. Like, why did I do that? I was thinking I need to start clearing, and it's like the same matchup can play out differently depending on your game plan from the beginning. WorldEight, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, Ron said pretty much everything. I think that's appropriate. We always need to account for, the changing game state. And yeah, sometimes we have to do a major pivot. Ideally that our deck supports that. Sometimes the decks don't have that potential. I think that's why you see some of these more linear decks drop off at higher MMRs, is because they don't even have that option. They have the one game plan, and it's a very, very good game plan. But if things ever, go off the rails, then it's all they can really go back to. Hunter is pretty resilient there. I do have one kind of, it is important to know your matchup and know your role in the matchup. There's a pretty influential article called Who's the Beatdown? This is an article that's been floating online for 30 years now. This is an old Magic article, and eventually says who will win this long game, like the long game. And it doesn't matter what the 2 decks were at the start. Usually it does, but not always. But one deck has inevitability. And if you don't have inevitability, you got to win now. The idea that can change mid game, you can actually have both, which is really quite the advantage. You could be inevitable to win and also be pushing the win aggressively. But sometimes we do have to say, well, this is my only route to victory, and I have to keep going with it. You don't want to make that decision lightly. You don't want to make that decision. You don't want to just do that without making the decision. But at least you've acknowledged that there is a strategic plan. You've assessed it. You've said, all right, this is what I'm going to do, and this is the option. These are the options I'm taking, and the ability to. I think it's a big growth moment for anyone playing this game who says, over this last game is really weird. I had to totally change what I was doing and then just ship everything face, and like that's actually I don't know if every player would be able to do that. It's obviously just always take things in context. The one story I have on this is that not long ago we had Nagamage in the format. Nagamage actually had inevitability over Control Warrior. Now, Control Warrior is the quote-unquote control deck there. But the Control Warrior, the only way for that deck to really win is to beat down the combo. What essentially was the combo deck. The combo deck had enough damage in it that you, as the warrior, just had to ship all of your bashes, all of your slam, everything had to go face. And it was total. It was just. You didn't think that's how the matchup would go, but that was the best route to victory for warrior. Almost every game. Otherwise, they were just going to die to Sif damage. On 8, it was just kind of this ticking time bomb, and it was faster than Odin, so you had to just try and beat the beat down. But yeah, almost every game, it's you got to take in the context and figure out what your strategy is at the beginning of the game, assess, and then occasionally reassess and go from there.
I lost a game the other day where somebody tempoed out Sif on like 4 or 5 at +2 on it, but they knew that I couldn't clear it, and I didn't have a clear for it, or they knew it was unlikely that I could clear it. And I went 2 turns, 3 turns, I couldn't get rid of it. They dealt with my threats, then they reverbed, then bop, bop, bop. And how often do you see Sif that early in a mage? You don't. And it's
very rare.
But they read the room. They said, okay, I think if I could play this, they're not going to be able to take care of it. I'm going to be able to take advantage of it and go. I was really, really impressed. And so that kind of brings us into the next question. And I know we're quite long here. We're going into coin concede type territory here. Are you guys still good to finish up? Because we're about halfway through this topic.
Sure, yeah.
Okay, just making sure. And you, dear listeners, if you're still here, we appreciate you. So sometimes you can draw, like sometimes you get a card, you have a plan, and then you draw a card, and you're like, oh, this card would be really good right now. But then you look at it, you might not look at it. I think that's what we're doing. But if you're thinking about your future turns, it might make your next couple turns suboptimal. But it might be good in that moment. But if it's dealt with, that's a problem, where if you would have done something else, it might have been better for you long term. How do you make that decision? Ron, what do you think? Like when you have those kind of opportunities, like do you take the advantage now, or do you think, hey, no, I can save that and make a better play now, even if, or a suboptimal, a less good play now, but it's going to be better for me in the next couple turns. How do you make that decision? That's a doozy.
Well, you're going to love this answer, Tito. Defense. But it really does just have so much to do with the context of the situation. Generally, if you draw a card that looks better than all of your other options that you were thinking about doing on that turn, you just play that card. For the most part, that will be correct more often than it will not be correct. But you do need to be very aware of the matchup, of your role in the matchup, of what deck your opponent is playing, of what the board state looks like at that time, your opponent's life total, how many resources you have, how many resources they have, the mana, your 1 turn, 2 turn, maybe 3 turn game plan, and so on, that formulates all of those different varying aspects to help you decide, is it better to do this now or to hold it? Because I'm assuming this is the type of question you're bringing up where it's like, oh, I drew the card, or like, this is the important thing. This is the thing that I've been waiting for. This is the thing maybe that my deck is mostly built around in some way or another. It's one of the centerpieces of my deck. Do I use said centerpiece right now, or do I save it for later? I will frequently save it for later if it is some kind of like burn or damage card that is a finisher that closes out the game, because you don't want to, in most cases, use it early and enable your opponent, assuming it's some kind of like control style matchup, for them to then shrug off that damage because it didn't kill them, heal up, get out of range, and play safer. But if it's a surprise finish, they don't have enough information to play around it in advance where they maybe could have otherwise with some of the options or cards available in their deck. So extremely context-based. Most of the time, if you draw your good card, you should probably just slam your good card. But don't always do it. Look at your options. Look at what's available for you to do over the next 1 to 3 turns, what you anticipate from your opponent, what's likely from them, what the matchup looks like, and so on. And that should give you hopefully enough information to reach the best
I
decision.
think I have a good example of this today where, maybe not the best example, but I had a game, and I forget what class I was playing against. I was on my phone. We were taking a drive. We had to go to Boston to get processed for clear. But I had a hand, the board was clear. I think they had just cleared my board. And I had a hand, it was like 7 mana, and I had a hand where I had ABJ. I drew Yodeler, and I think I had Banjosaur. And I thought maybe I should just tempo out Yodeler, because let's get some pressure on. I can hero power, and I don't have a better play. But I decided against it because I'm like, well, it's probably more important to use it with an enabler unless I have really no other choice. And since I didn't feel in danger of dying that turn, I decided to keep the Yodeler, and it ended up working out for me because then I drew an egg, and that drew me 2 dinosaurs that I slammed into whatever threats they had, and it kind of won me the game. But it kind of went counterintuitive to me, where it's like, well, let's just get some pressure on the board right now because they don't have anything to they don't have any pressure right now, and I'd rather try to put them on their back foot, even if it's not the most optimal play. So, I mean, it can vary, and that might have been the wrong play. That might have been the wrong play, and I got lucky, or it might have been the right play in the right matchup. It depends.
It's hard to evaluate too sometimes in those situations. So the best thing you can do is sort of some kind of like in the moment cost benefit analysis of how helpful is this for me right now to sacrifice the potential extra benefit that I get from this minion's effect if I'm tempoing it early while I don't get to use its effect. Will its attack power or, whatever threat it represents right now be worth it for what I potentially am sacrificing, and how likely am I to draw the thing that I would use it for, that I might be sacrificing its effect for? If you have hardly any cards that do the thing and you have a lot of cards left, maybe it's right to just throw it out there because it's pressure. If you have fewer cards left to draw, maybe it's a bad idea because your chances of drawing that thing go up. So, it depends.
And there's matchup knowledge too, right? Like, if you see what they've...
That too, yeah. Like, if you're playing against a deck that can armor up or heal or do a whole lot of things that stabilize, then is that pressure even really worth it? Or are you playing against a deck that's going to die really soon, and this damage right now represents, hey, you're on a clock now, you might die in 1 or 2 turns, then maybe it is worth it.
Or even maybe, well, I know they've played their Bellowing Flames, I know they've played their this, I know they played their this, so they don't really have a good way to even simply deal with this, so it's probably better in that situation because what are they going to do? And
right.
And maybe you bait out the one last thing they have or whatnot, and it works out. What do you think, WorldEight?
Yeah, I think this is, as you progress into the game and the game state gets more complex, it's important to assess the strategy that we're on. And I believe the original question is kind of we drew a very impactful card, right? That may make us reassess the strategy and plan we're at. That take a minute. You go to the rope if you absolutely have to. You do have a little bit of time to think about it. But there is only so many turns in a Hearthstone game. There's only so many resources. This was alluded to. Ron did a bit of alluding to this before, that we only have so many cards in our hands, even our deck, right, to accomplish whatever we're trying to accomplish. Personally, I've actually run into this quite a bit with the hand buff deck. I put in a pretty interesting Ziliax. It's Power Twin. What ends up happening is that this is kind of a little board in a box Ziliax. You put this and you top deck it on 6, and you can get these pair of 4/6s that potentially could just end the game unchecked. And you've probably been pursuing some other game plan for like 3 turns. So the question is, do I keep going with this hand buffing thing, and I've got some other stats, or do I, play this other card which could potentially win the game? And a little bit of risk assessment, saying, am I going to put a lot of weight on this or not? The reason I put that card in the deck was to do that move. Was to do I want to at least, challenge the opponent to have it, because if they don't have it, then I win. That's a great, let's do that thing.
Yeah.
It's, I think my guiding light for this is always, what's the most powerful thing I can do over the next 2 to 3 turns? Often if we draw this card and we're like, whoa, we need to reassess, it's because it is going to impact our next 2 turns, 3 turns. If it impacts this turn and it's like a slam dunk, then yeah, we're slamming it anyway. But if we're thinking about it, it means we're thinking 2-3 turns ahead. And so, what other options do we have? Is this the best one? And if I still am wavering on it, I then will ask myself the question, if I was my opponent, what would I be most scared of? Like, if I had this information, and that'll often clarify, oh yeah, I should probably do this because this thing is terrifying to face, if I don't have the resources to deal with it, right? Like, because all given things, we have limited information as to what the opponent has, and they have a handful of snow flipper penguins. If sometimes we could just assume that without them forging anything. If we don't, because we don't exactly know. Yeah. So I would say, what's the most powerful thing we can do over the next 2 to 3 turns, given the context of the strategy of our deck? Sometimes it will transform the game. We were talking before about completely pivoting our strategy. Maybe we, top deck some big, face damage card that completely enables us to, a kill command and Hunter for running that card. Maybe all of a sudden we have a path to victory that way. But that still takes 3 turns to get there. But now we start clicking the hero power button to do it, to even get in that range. So, yeah, always in context. But I always say, what's the best strategy, and if not that, what's the most powerful play that I could do, at least for the next 2-3 turns?
I was very impressed, by the way, with that deck building choice of the twin and power Ziliax. I haven't really seen that very often, and it is devastating. So,
yeah,
nice job.
The theory there is that if you buff it, it's a quadruple buff, right? Like you double the Zell.
It's insane. Yeah, I played like a 12 14 one of those, and I was like, okay, so next turn this is 48 damage. Oh my god. Yeah.
That's very nice. So one thing that always kind of gets my goat is, not, I guess that might be the wrong phrase, is when do you start hedging your bets in your plan against what's left in your deck? Like, let's say, for example, I can do 2 different things on my turn. I could, and I'm sticking with Egg Warrior, Egg Hunter, because that's what I've been playing. But let's say I have two options right now. I have 10 cards in my deck. I have 2 cards in my hand. I'm just giving a very specific example just to kind of illustrate the point. I could either play Egg and then maybe play the second Egg or Hero Power, or I could slam down a 7/7 Dinosaur. I know I still have 2 Yodelers of the Kraken in the last 10 cards in my deck, which is going to be, and I still have beasts in my deck that I know I'm going to draw off the egg. So I've done the math here. I know I have a couple beasts I can get off my eggs. I know I have enablers, but I also have a 7/7 that I could play. When do you start hedging your bets against what's still in your deck as the optimal play versus playing the best thing in your hand at the time? Ron, what do you think?
I would definitely need more information in that game to make that kind of decision. But as a default, usually it's still play the power card. Play the one that has more damage right now. Put them under more pressure right now. Especially with a class that generally leans more proactive like Hunter, there's a good chance you've already pushed a decent amount of chip damage over the course of the game to get to this turn 7 or later where you have a 7/7 and you have enough mana to play that card and, slam it down and threaten to kill them. The other option is I'm not threatening to kill you. And maybe it's a playstyle thing for me, but I typically want to be threatening to kill you on most of my turns. If I can, that's what I want to do. And that generally makes for the stronger Hearthstone turn. Because if you make a turn and your opponent on the other side is like, whew, okay, I have a moment to breathe. I have a moment to relax. Nothing's going to kill me yet. That's generally not a position you want them to be in unless, you have a specific style of deck that plays that type of way. So it's very dependent on a whole lot of different situations. And it also, it could still be the much more correct play to hold back the minion because you need to get that other thing out because maybe you already have some of a board and you want this Death Rattle minion to show up on the board as protection for the board or a punish for them to remove your board, because usually it would be an AoE effect that would kill everything that would include your egg, and then you get to draw your other payoff card and do more stuff. In just a general vacuum type of situation though, usually the more power the better.
Well,
Yeah, I'm a big component of do the powerful thing this turn because you don't know what the next 2 turns are going to look like in terms of draw, what they do. We have very limited information as to what our opponent has in their hands. We have even less. We 2 turns in the future potentially be 4 new cards into the whole equation, right? You drew 2, they drew 2, maybe more. I also don't like to give my opponent any breathing room if I can help it, because if you do, then they have a chance to pursue their game plan. And then you have to react to that, whatever they're trying to do. Maybe they get a chance to play their big, powerful 7/7, right? And then you have to deal with theirs, because you didn't do yours. So generally, unless, you have motivation to hold back or not do the powerful thing, my default would be to do the powerful thing, right? Yeah, I don't think there's much more that I want to add onto Ron. So then, I think that was all good thoughts there.
It's almost like Ron knows how to play this game. All right, so this one we've kind of talked about a little bit, and actually quite a bit. But let's say we're on the opposite. We have a plan. We have a deck. We know what we're doing with our deck. We have a plan for our next 2 turns. But our opponent is now made some plays that are keeping us on the back foot. I think a good example of this would typically be against a token hunter, whereas they get up to speed fast and you could potentially be dead in a couple turns. How do you decide, well, I should try to react to what they do because I want to be dead in 2 turns if I don't, but I could try to maybe, pop some of their saddle ups and hopefully get lucky, but if I stick to my plan, and the percentages might not be the best. If I stick to my plan, I'm going to be able to, get to my Hollow Hound that's now going to be a 4/6 because I played whatever, and that's going to be what saves me. When do you how do you evaluate those kind of things where it's like, I could try to react to this and maybe that would work, but my best solution probably is sticking to my plan? How do you kind of evaluate that? And I know it depends.
It comes down to playing the odds mostly, I think, where you need to ask yourself the questions: how do I win? How do I lose? And what is the most likely way either to get to the point that I win or get to the point that I don't lose, whatever that might be, and how your deck is constructed and how it plays, and what are the highest percentage chances for me to do execute the type of decision or the type of line that gives me the best chance to get to the point that I want to be. So it obviously very much varies based on what is happening in that game and what you're up against and what cards you have in hand and in deck, and whether you can draw into them or discover into them or whatever the case might be for that situation, and what would be the highest likelihood to grant you the level of success that you're looking for. There's a lot of information to take in. There's a lot of stuff that's hidden information too, and there's stuff that's just either random or comes down to good luck or bad luck sometimes, where, well, if I draw this card, and you can say, sure, I have a 50% chance to draw this card in some cases because you have hardly any things left in your deck and you have a couple draws to get it. So it's like, okay, well, it's not, a low chance. It might be a coin flip. Do you take that coin flip, or is there a different thing that you can do that, okay, well, this isn't a percentage chance, 50%, or maybe even worse than that. It's guaranteed that I can do this one thing, but it's not as powerful as the one thing that I could take a chance at finding. Sometimes that's take a chance at lethal, because I could draw this one card that wins the game on the spot, but I only have one card and I've got maybe like a 1 in 5 chance of doing that. But assess the situation, and do you have a better than 20% chance of even surviving the next turn, considering, what you're up against and what they're likely to have in your current health total? So many factors go into play. But you just have to evaluate all of them in your 75 seconds on your turn and figure it all out, find the best line, find it fast, execute it, and hope that it works out. Some of the time, it might just be hope for the best. If you can control it, absolutely. Do your best to control it. But there's a lot of elements you can't control, so then it's identifying your outs and playing to your outs.
And one of the best feelings as any player, but especially as a streamer, when you're losing and you have 24 cards left in your deck and you're saying, all I need to do is draw Keeper Strength and I turn the situation around. And then you draw Keeper Strength and it's just like, yep, got it.
We call that a skill shot.
As a skill shot. What are your thoughts there, WorldEight?
Yeah, I just got to believe in the heart of the cards. I mean, it's pretty easy, guys. I don't know about you. Just
Thanks,
you got to wish for it hard enough.
Nailed it. End of discussion.
End of discussion, really. Yeah, no, I think this comes up a lot, and especially when I watch high level streamers, they will talk about playing to their outs a lot, because a lot of times when we're on our back foot, it's because the opponent has momentum. It's very unlikely that we will stop that momentum. So we're going to have to find a kind of a moonshot approach most of the time to turn it around. And you don't need to win on 30 health. You can win on 1 health. I've won on 1 health quite a lot to stabilize and win. But, you have to know what that planning ahead, how to get to that spot. This happened to me a few days ago. I was up against a Zarimi priest. Everything looked awful, but I stabilized at 1 health, and they had no way of getting through taunts. Like it just was impossible for them without an Amenth. Well, that was their only out in the whole deck, is I could get to 1 health and be fine because that deck had no direct damage. You should run Gyro Worm, by the way. Gyro Worm's very good. Uh, it's yeah, I will, if I'm in those dire situations, I will, kind of abandon everything to go for the big swing back. Ron was actually spectating me the other day, and I made a mistake on turn 3 where I coined out a Painter's Virtue, where I should have waited to swing the game back with a Keeper Strength on 6 with a coin. And I was kicking myself after the game. I'm I should have, I knew 3 turns in advance how this game was going to go. And I misplayed it because I didn't really think of, all right, I'm on the back foot against these trolley problems, and this board's getting really bad. Let me, mitigate
but you're always
it. No.
supposed to coin the weapon on turn 3.
Yeah, no,
I hate those situations, right, where it's you knew that you needed to save it because you knew how this was going to go, but you did the play that's correct in 90% of situations, even though you knew this was the 10% situation where you shouldn't, right? And then you kick yourself because you're I knew it was coming. I could have done this. I could have made this play.
He believes in the heart of the card.
I believe in the heart of the cards. Well, it's also, I didn't do the play automatically. Maybe I did kind of reach for it. But I knew the next turn because I had been I saw the first wave of aggression, and I was all right, this is going to be tough. And then came another trolley problem with Conductor, and I was okay, this got really bad. But generally, for the question, it's play to the outs, play to the matchup, and the context is always important. But if we're on the back foot, what's the path to victory? And slim is better than 0, right? If it's a 5% chance, it's better than a 0% chance. And if you play the deck 100 times, that matchup 100 times, and you win that 5%, that's another 5 games that you've won. So it's an important skill to realize, and there are often more outs than we can even remember sometimes. Maybe there's in the Paladin deck, we're playing with some pretty big taunts. Maybe we'll pull a taunt off the top in that particular example, but it's, you gotta play to win, right? It's not just play to lose less embarrassingly, right? If we don't play to win, we don't win the game. We still lose. And I think that's the short version of it for me. Is I'll always look for a route to victory, and you don't win every game either, and you just got to take that lump too, and move to the next one.
And I always recommend, I know depending on who you are, a lot of people concede a game if it feels unwinnable, but if you're not going to die, you have your deck tracker probably. Look to what potential outs do you have. Is it a 1 in 100? Maybe. But if you can win that game, those would be the games you remember winning. And that's just one thing. And every time you do that, you learn. So if you have that opportunity, the only way I'm going to win is if I draw this. Well, wait and see. Don't concede. Believe in the heart of the cards. Speaking of heart of the cards, though, I think you said Conductor and Trolley Problem. Isn't Trolley Problem a road card?
So,
yeah, he's talking about Stick Up, just regularly.
Yeah.
Off of Stick Up.
I think
Rogue's playing it often.
I think as I do want to make a small aside that there are some tactical decisions we can make to kind of mitigate us to get us along the way. You can use an Observer of Myths as a 1/4 taunt.
Yes.
Right? It doesn't actually have taunt, but it will get you 4. It's effectively 4 armor, in a real pinch.
Yes, the must kill cards that people often have referred to those cards as a soft taunt, which is, I think, the number one reference to the old Bran that was in the meta before, the 3 mana 2/4 that doubled battle cries if it was on the board. If that card's on the board, you're killing it immediately if you can as the opponent. So the card just kind of described as having a soft taunt, and that's a very clever tactical decision that players often did as, hey, it's turn 3 tempo brand, because this makes your opponent panic and play differently and use a resource that they would have maybe wanted to conserve for a later time, but they need to use it now because they're terrified of what this card now represents for
I
you.
believe I said that at the beginning of this whole topic, where I said that, or sometime today, it was like sometimes I play that one for Observer as a taunt.
Yep.
Okay. So how often do you think, I'll ask you, Ron, first this, how often do you think that when we plan out our turns, that it actually goes according to plan? Like, I know it depends, but like when you make these plans, do you feel like for the most part you kind of hit them, or do you think that you make this plan and obviously you're going to reevaluate every turn, but how often do you think it does go to that plan?
Oh, it's all over the place, but I'd say more than half the time probably is common, because at a typical Hearthstone turn, you're looking at your available options with your mana, and it gets more complicated the deeper into the game you go and the more mana you have available, because obviously you have more decisions at that point. So let's say take like an 8 mana turn. You have now looked at your hand and you've allocated all of your resources and how to spend all of your mana, which you think is going to be probably your best turn, but you have discover cards and draw cards. So you're like, okay, in a vacuum, let's say the discover and the draw completely brick and they do nothing helpful for me. I'm doing XYZ things with my mana here. Now let me start with a discover. Oh, there's these different options to evaluate all in their own way. One of them is this mana. Well, I could use this with these cards in my hand, and now that works. So let me go ahead and pick this discover. Now it's time to draw, and I can still draw while doing these other things that are good. Oh, I just drew a different card that now makes me reevaluate again. Okay, and this mana cost with these things, and I can do that. Okay, now I'll do this play. So that's like, that often could happen, especially with like a rogue deck on a turn 8, where you had a plan in your mind for what you were reasonably likely to do, and it changed 5 or 6 times over the course of that 75-second turn as you evaluated like 6 to 10 different things that you potentially could have done or wanted to do. And then there's other things, especially like much simpler in the early game, where you have a 1 mana card and a 2 mana card on turn 3, and then you top decked a 3 mana card. And maybe I just want to play that instead, especially because I have another card that's 2 mana that wasn't that great on this turn, but is pretty good with the other 2 that I have in my hand for turn 4. So I'm going to go 3 here, and then 2 and 2, and then I'll play the 1 later. Like that kind of stuff very much varies, but I'd say more often than not, if you have a plan that you've already formulated with your resources in hand and the mana you have available, it's probably going to be the thing that you do. It's just, you always want to make sure that you're not fully committing to it and you're leaving your options open for maximum flexibility in your game plan and game state until you can find what will be the best possible turn for you.
And I would say, too, on top of that, unless you have to play cards in a very specific order on that turn, that you have to play card A into card B into card C, tap first, discover first, and all that, draw first, because that may, like Ron was saying, that may impact your decisions. And the earlier, it's how often do you play the discover card last, or you tap last, and you're like, oh, if I would have just done that first, then I could have done this, and I could have done that, and it happens.
I mean, everybody does that too. Like, even the absolute best of the best do that. Like, our current world champion Pocket Train will make a play like that and then beat himself up on stream as he's like, I'm such a moron, I can't believe I did this when I could have done that. It's a common mistake. Everybody's working on it.
He's a paragon of humility. What do you think there, WorldEight?
All good points. Ideally, if you are bringing a more dynamic deck into the match, you are hopefully comfortable with that kind of complex decision tree. And if you aren't, well, it's great that you're playing it, because you will get more comfortable. You kind of have to. You do have, the time on the other side of the when it's your opponent's turn, think about what you're planning to do. Anticipate, I have this plan, it's unlikely to change. The discover first, planning out your turn. It's, I would say the question is originally, how often does our plan change? And I would say my plans very frequently change. I would say I rarely pivot strategies entirely. It has to be a pretty big motivating factor. But it's a lot of reps on the deck and knowing the matchups. If I don't know the deck, then yes, I will change my plans, but it's because I don't really know the deck that I'm playing. I also I find there's a big advantage to playing unusual cards, to playing unusual lists, because that'll really throw my opponent off. Because I know the matchup, I know what I'm going to do. And when I play a card that they don't anticipate or expect, and then they're off their game. So this is kind of flipping it. They're all of a sudden, they had a game plan, and all of a sudden Keeper Strength came from a hand buff Paladin, and they really didn't expect that. And that won me a lot of games this week because no one saw that coming. And then all of a sudden they thought was a lot.
They all expect it now. But it was really good when it was unexpected.
For 4 or 5 days, it was. I blew out so many games because players would just overcommit to the board. But that's an advantage to, assessing the card library. I talk a lot about that because that's a resource that you can get creative with, and putting your opponent in the opposite side of that, which is forcing them to adapt to, I'm still pursuing my same game plan there. But by using a slightly unusual kind of surprise factor, they have to adapt, and they're linear. And honestly, the control decks right now are pretty linear. There's not a lot of discover. We're not seeing a lot of blood decay, right? Where it's discover. It's a lot of what was in the deck is in the deck. So for me personally, though, I understand, if I understand the matchup, it's very unlikely that my plan's going to change. But it might be very likely that my opponent's plan changes because they don't know what I'm doing and are very confused.
There's always a good feeling when you see your opponent hovering over your card for more than 5 seconds saying, I don't understand what is happening in this world. And,
I got that a ton with the Ziliacs. They're like, what is going? There's 2 of these? Doubling a power, what?
And to be fair, as far as what you're saying about Keeper Strength, if you talk to Pilot or anybody else that hangs out on my stream fairly often, if I'm playing Paladin, I find a way to get Keeper Strength in that deck, whether it belongs there or not, because the card is just too good. And one final suggestion on the things we were just talking about here, as far as being ready, if you have those draw cards, if you have a tap, if you have a discover cards, unless you're a Habu Gabu or Pocket Train or No Hands Gamer or RonMexico, don't wait till the rope starts burning to play that card. I know we like to think about our turns, but if you're going to have to maybe pivot on that turn, give yourself time, because you're going to make mistakes in that case. Even if you think you have your plan, when you pop out and you see this card, what am I going to do? And you're going to mess it up. So don't do that. So we're getting close to wrapping it up here. I know it's been a while. So what do you think about mistakes that generally people make? We've covered some of these as we've talked about it, but what do you think some mistakes people generally make when planning ahead of time? We have a couple of bullet points here, but Ron, what do you think?
Probably one of the main ones is just inflexibility. I think that there are a lot of game plans that are pretty linear, and even the ones that aren't, it's a common trap to fall into for players to just play their game plan irrespective of matchup or opponent or game state, and just my deck is supposed to do this, so this is what I'm gonna do, and it's either gonna work or it isn't. And, there's a lot more nuance in the game. The more you play it, the more you play the deck and learn the matchups and figure out how to improve your bad matchups, and maybe even improve your good matchups too, where it's I can optimize this or that. But the biggest mistake I think that I see most frequently, outside of like your typical mechanical mistakes, which are things that everyone can improve just by, playing more Hearthstone probably. It's your macro game plan. It's, I've committed to this one thing and I won't change it. Sometimes you need to change it, and being open to more flexibility usually will open the door to being able to win more Hearthstone games.
Fair enough. WorldEight?
Yeah, no, I think that, I agree. I think that that's something I see a lot is, this was my plan coming in and I'm sticking to it. Even if the ship is sinking, is obviously a pretty egregious one, but also, coming back to a much earlier point, just spending your mana. I'm not sure why, but what, like I said, I'll, no, not to paint anyone in a bad light here, but I'll spectate games and, legend players at pretty good ranks, they'll hold on, they'll hold back, for what I can't see as any really, motivating reason to, push the advantages when you have them, especially when they're going to be part of your bigger game plan. Anticipating what your opponent's going to do is great, but don't go out of your way to make your opponent's life uncomfortable. Kind of pursue your own game plan first. I think is a kind of a pretty common mistake. It's not as egregious as just being completely linear, but on the other side of the coin, being like, well, I'm going to make this exception, then I'm going to make this exception, then I'm going to make this exception, and then all of a sudden, it's mid to halfway through the game and you haven't pursued your main game plan at all. I see that all the time somehow.
I'm going to say, what you're going to do, and you know what your opponent's going to do. If you're playing at, you're playing at these legend levels, but if you know what your opponent's going to do, your opponent knows what they're going to do, and they know what you're going to do, and you know that they know what you know that they know what we're going to do, and they know that we know that they know that we know that they know what we're going to do. So you can kind of almost sometimes get too much into the planning of like trying to be too crafty and all that. And yes, you can try to bait things out and all that, but sometimes just make them have the cards. Are they going to have the Reno? Maybe. Are they going to have the Ziliax? Probably, but they might not. How many cards do they have in their deck? They still have 18 cards in their deck. Make them have it. Like, sometimes with all this planning that we're talking about, you can get too cute. And if you find yourself, one of the weird things I've seen for me, and this might not be for everybody, is sometimes I can go, I'll play a deck for the first day and I'll go 11-2. I'm like, oh, this deck's great. And then the next day I go like 5-14, and I'm like, what happened? And it's because as I start to understand the deck, I start to think I know it better, and then I start getting cute. And instead of just kind of sticking with what worked on day one, I'm like, oh, well, if I do this, and this will happen, and this will happen. And then you're like, well, no, I should have just done what I was doing the whole time. And it's a weird thing. So don't get too cute. That'd be my advice here. Like, don't think that you're, really being super crafty by doing these things and being 5 steps ahead. Just be a couple heads of yourself and understand what you're doing. WorldEight, you got any final thoughts on this before we wrap this show up?
Oh, I think it's, go into the match with a strategy. Hopefully you know the particular matchup with the two decks. If you don't, the best way to learn is to play it and see what works, see what doesn't work. If you are finding yourself frustrated with the matchup over and over and over again, maybe it's a bad matchup. Maybe we don't understand the matchup. Like that's why I mentioned the story of, a control player going against a combo player. The control player actually has to try and end the game before the combo player does. So, I think just make sure there's a strategy, right? I think there's a lot of players out there who are very good tactically, and they get, they can get very far with that. But the great players are the ones that have really great strategy, and know when to adjust or even completely abandon that strategy as the game state changes.
Even if a matchup is 70-30, I know it's easy to think, well, this is a matchup I lose. If you hit the baseball 3 out of 10 times, you're basically an all-star, right? So if you, instead of thinking, well, I'm going to lose this matchup, if you think, well, I'm going to win this matchup 30% of the time, then you're probably going to end up improving that to maybe like 35% of the time, because you figure out how you win that matchup the best opportunity, or maybe 40%. Maybe you can find that out because you're not just saying, oh, I'm going to lose. You figure out how to find those little things that might get you the win. So just keep that in mind. Ron, you got any final thoughts on this topic?
I think we've said about all that we can say for this specific part, at least for now. I'll leave it at that.
Fair enough. And that was a lot to take in, but I think we still have a little room for dessert. So we normally interview people, but when we have return guests, that's kind of silly. So we usually ask them just like one final interview question to end the night. So I'm going to ask both of you guys. We'll start with WorldEight here. WorldEight, if you're the grill master at the barbecue, what are we eating?
What are we eating? Well, today I had actually my family over, and we had hamburgers, hot dogs, and chicken kebabs. And I know you have an opinion on kebabs there, Tito. We actually live in I live in New Jersey, so we actually get Pennsylvania Dutch farmers markets near us. And so they actually have all these excellent cuts of meat. They also sell like these pre-done kebabs, which are just great you just pick them up and you toss them on the grill. So that's like kind of the easiest thing to do, and that's what I did today. It was great. Everyone was happy.
It sounds fantastic. Ron, how about yourself?
Nice. I mean, I kind of can't go wrong with like burgers and dogs. It's classic. It's perfect for a grill. If I'm grilling, I'm going with burgers and dogs every time. But I also like to have like some grilled vegetables sometimes. I really enjoy corn on the cob as like a thing to throw on the grill as well. And my probably favorite, like, I don't know, main course type thing that is not as common at grills or for grilling is mahi-mahi. Absolutely love grilling mahi-mahi. So I'd go with that one.
One of the things I do is if I'm grilling steak, or if I'm grilling more than just burgers and hot dogs and sausage, that's like it's more than just a quick thing, is I always have kind of a colander, and I have mushrooms and onions and sometimes peppers in that, and that's just going to go on whatever. I love that. Dear listener, if you've stuck with us this long, you must feel we bring in some value out there. And if you can give us that little 5-star review somewhere on Spotify, or if you can actually log into that Apple app and figure out how to leave an actual review, that helps people find the show. And I think we'd like to find people to listen to the show, because there's valuable things that people are coming on to say, like RonMexico and WorldEight here, I think have given us lots to think about today. And I really appreciate them. So, WorldEight, where can people find you on social media?
Well, the place I'm most active on is probably Discord. You can just DM me directly, WorldEight. I'm also on Twitter, WorldEight_HS, and I will try and maybe do a stream every once a month or something, World_8 on Twitch. So those are the 3 main places.
Mr. Mexico, where can people find you?
Yeah, nice. I can also be found on Twitter at Ron_HS, and the main place that you'll find me is streaming every weekday, Monday through Friday, right around 7 p.m. Eastern on Twitch at RonMexicoHS.
And Ron, do you have any shout-outs this week? Oh, I'm sorry. You can find me on Twitch and Twitter at Tito Santana HS. Ron, any shout-outs?
Shout-outs for this week go to my esteemed co-hosts of this show tonight, Tito and WorldEight, who are fantastic people, really great contributors to the Hearthstone scene. And just to throw in one more, since I don't have them on the show here with us tonight, but Tylanif the Blind Guy, he just goes by Ty the Blind Guy, is a up and comer, I think, in the Hearthstone community that I come across recently. A really cool dude. He's been streaming a lot lately as well, and a great addition to the community.
We talked about him a little bit too. He lost the pilot in THL, which is great for us, but also he has been playing since January, and he's playing in the Pro League, which the THL Pro League, like you say, has got people like RonMexico, Pocket Train, you might have heard of him. No Hands Gamer, I think, does it. You have Dreadeye.
Not No Hands currently. Dreadeye's not currently in it either, but McBanterface is, and there's a lot of really strong players that are in Pro Series. Donkey plays in Pro Series as well in THL, and he's made it like way deep in a Masters Tour. Chewy has made it very deep in Masters Tours before. There's so many incredibly talented players.
And Ty has been playing in that since he picked up Hearthstone in January, like we said. WorldEight, you got any final shout outs tonight?
Yeah, I mean, within the Hearthstone world, well, thanks for hosting, Tito, and thanks for doing this with us, Ron. It's been great to be on with you. But I do want to shout out to Sunk for hitting rank 1. Is just if you interact with him at all, he's just very chill. Come up with a lot of great deck lists recently, so it's nice to see someone that technical prowess shine through too. And he was just kind of hit rank 1. He's like, oh, that's cool, and then he just let it slide. It just I love seeing that kind of personality in Hearthstone too. Of it's not like super competitive or super self-promoting, just someone who's playing the game to play the game. And then outside of Hearthstone, this is it's Mother's Day, roughly around when this is coming out, so big shout out to all the moms out there, because I wouldn't be here without one. So just the obvious nod to them as well.
And obviously, thank you guys for coming on, and I want to thank the listeners for, if you're still hearing this, you stuck with us. Hopefully you enjoyed it, and hopefully you get something out of it. I think this was a fantastic episode. Give a shout out to Enzo, who I queued into yesterday, and I know he's been playing that mech warrior that he got to legend with, and I was so excited to play against him. And I was playing my own homebrew of that egg hunter, and he disconnected, and we didn't get to play. We said hi, we said good luck, have fun, and then his modem died, and I was so sad because I was so excited for that matchup. And I also want to shout out to Ray, Blister Guy, just a generally good individual, great member of the Hearthstone community. And I just love the fact that, I'm talking to this guy from Australia that I've never met about metal in DMs on Discord. And it's just like, what a wonderful world we live in sometimes, where it's like the internet has some good, bad, but I think we found some great communities. But anyway, guys, I think we're toast after all that. We'll see ya.
All right, see ya.
Slide two brothers meet one another when they slide up to the mic. It's bread and butter with one another. Let's start up that recording light.